Chapter 180. Another cave abode to observe the world. The mysteriousness of the light in front of him had completely exceeded the scope of words. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and the inexplicable, indescribable light and shadow in front of him underwent a drastic change. The light and shadow were like a lens zooming in at an extremely fast speed, slowly revealing the scene of a certain place in the world. This scene was not only the scene of the extreme northwest of the primordial world. Instead, as his gaze shifted and his thoughts changed, the light and shadow also changed drastically. The scenes of the ends of the entire primordial world and the poles of the world appeared in the mysterious light and shadow in front of him. Of course, the scene of the extreme northwest was the clearest and the easiest to discover. Luo Fan's gaze shifted and his mind changed. The mysterious light in front of him kept changing and swimming. Suddenly, it was as if he was circling around the extreme of the entire primordial world. The extreme of the world in all directions of the primordial world was continuously revealed in the light in front of him. After half a day, under Luo Fan's change of mind, the change finally returned to the scene of the extreme northwest. When his mind was empty, the light transformed into a mysterious and unfathomable form of the primordial world that could not be described with words. So the primordial world has such a profound mystery. Luo Fan said something that was very similar to the previous sentence, but the meaning was completely different. His previous sentence was an instinctive murmur in shock. But now, this sentence was a sigh of sudden realization. At the same time, he also roughly knew that the continent under his feet contained an incredible mystery. This continent seemed to be at the extreme northwest, and it was a place that Luo Fan could only reach by walking to the end of the extreme northwest and then entering the sky. However, in reality, no matter which direction one went in the primordial world, as long as one reached the extreme of the world and found the sky at the extreme of the world, one would be able to reach this continent. The logic was mysterious and indescribable. Suddenly, Luo Fan felt that his mind was in a very mysterious state. In a trance, he seemed to have a feeling that he was about to break through. However, before he could grab hold of it, this feeling instantly disappeared, causing him to feel slightly depressed. Luo Fan knew in his heart that this was because he was still lacking a little bit of maturity, so he could only suppress this depression. If the power of the great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes hadn't decreased, they should have completely entered the state of breakthrough now. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. The power of the golden eyes of the great sun and the silver eyes of the bright moon had been greatly reduced, making it impossible for him to see through the source of something as soon as he saw it. It made it impossible for him to receive the mysteries of the light shadow the moment he saw it. Therefore, it made it impossible for him to use the mysteries contained within to achieve a true breakthrough. This drawback was not irreparable. It was impossible to see through these mysteries in an instant, but could be understood through a long period of comprehension. Knowing his own advantages and disadvantages, Luo Fan instantly determined his next course of action. Turning his gaze, he focused his attention on the ends of the earth beneath his feet, looking around. This Xian-Chi continent, which could only be described as the ends of the earth, contained an incomparably rich primal chaos chi. This gray primal chaos chi had already condensed into a liquid form, like a liquid filling every part of this continent. This primal chaos chi was not little, and the degree of its richness was not the slightest bit inferior to the peak of Buzhou Mountain in the primitive world. Moreover, compared to the primal chaos chi at the peak of Buzhou Mountain, the primal chaos chi on this continent was even purer and more authentic. Although the primal chaos chi at Buzhou Mountain was rich, it was constantly transforming into Xiantian primal chaos chi. Although this kind of transformation was really difficult to detect in the endless primal chaos chi, it still existed after all. However, the primal chaos chi on this continent was completely different. Here, the primal chaos chi was like an eternal and indestructible Vajra, unimaginably stable. not to mention transforming into sentient primal chaos chi. There was not even a trace of it dissipating. Looking at this continent, Luo Fan suddenly had a strange feeling. This continent seemed to be infinitely vast, with no end in sight, but also infinitely narrow, almost only able to accommodate his 2 feet. This feeling was really quite mysterious. Under the nature of this continent, the magical powers such as imminent skyline and shrinking distance naturally had no effect. If Luo Fan wanted to travel across this continent, he could only rely on his 2 feet to walk slowly. Although with his sentient primal chaos chi, his speed was definitely not slow, even if he walked on his 2 feet. Stepping on the gray primal chaos chi, Luo Fan's figure was like a small boat, showing no signs of sinking. After looking around, he determined his target in the blink of an eye. It was a bottomless cliff at the edge of the continent tens of thousands of miles away from Sentient. Since this continent was a continent, its ground was naturally undulating, with countless kinds of terrains. Because the primal chaos chi was extremely stable, it did not form a flat ocean. Instead, it seemed to be attached to the ground, wrapping the ground, the rocks, and the deep pits with a gray, translucent protective layer. Stepping on it, he felt that it was soft and tough, but it felt quite wonderful. Luo Fan lifted his feet and took light strides, each step less than 100 feet. Although it was very shocking, compared to his previous speed of moving several miles per step, it was extremely slow. The ends of the earth seemed to be extremely vast, but also extremely narrow. This naturally proved that if one could comprehend the mysteries of this continent to a deep level, he would be able to move around on this continent at will, no longer needing to measure its size with his 2 feet. As Luo Fan walked, he comprehended in his heart the power of the great sun golden eyes and the bright moon silver eyes was greatly reduced on this continent. It could no longer let him see the countless mysteries with just one glance. This made Luo Fan, who had gradually become familiar with the power of the eyes, feel a little unaccustomed for a while, and also greatly slowed down his comprehension of the mysteries. Therefore, after a full 3 months, when he had walked less than 1/3 of the total distance of 30,000 miles, Luo Fan finally comprehended a little bit of the mysteries of this continent. From this little bit of mystery, Luo Fan comprehended a magical power. This kind of magical power was similar to shrinking the ground into an inch, but it was even more traceless, and the consumption of energy was even less noticeable. It was quite mysterious. Of course, the most important thing was that this magical power could be used on this continent. When the mantra of this magical power and the circulation route appeared in his mind, Luo Fan did not hesitate to use this cultivation method. His mind and consciousness flowed through the mantra of the mantra, and in an instant, a small trace of the magic power in his body separated and quickly flowed along the circulation route. In an instant, he felt that his body had become extremely light and incomparably free. The continent in front of him had also undergone a very strange and subtle change. Although the feeling that seemed to be infinitely vast and infinitely narrow still existed, he could already control it a little. With a slight movement of his mind, the distance between him and the cliff instantly shortened to 1 step. He lifted his foot and took a step, as if it was only a small step, but in a breath he had already crossed more than 100,000 miles and arrived at the top of this cliff. In 3 months, he had walked less than 1/3 of the distance, and now, in just a breath, he had crossed the remaining 2/3. This feeling was quite strange to Luo Fan. Standing on this cliff, he looked down and found that the untainted world, which he could only see when he raised his head, had already arrived at the bottom of this cliff. It was as if the entire untainted world was under this cliff. As endless light and shadows flashed across the cliff below, countless mysterious auras soared into the sky and rushed toward him. This is the place. Luo Fan was secretly delighted. First of all, he needed to spend a long time on this end of the world to comprehend the mystery of the Tao fruit, so that he could finally succeed in breaking through. And for this, he needed a foothold. Secondly, he had a very obscure idea. That was, he wanted to open up this mysterious end of the world into a cave abode that was different from the Surge Cave. In this way, even if something unexpected happened to Bujo Mountain in the future, such as being smashed and broken, he would still have a foothold. This could be considered as a cunning rabbit with 3 burrows, and it was better to nip trouble in the bud. The conditions of this cliff were so good, and it contained so many mysteries. It was the best choice. Therefore, the moment Luo Fan arrived on the cliff, he decided to use this position as the foothold of the cave abode. Luo Fan had even opened up a spirit space before, so he was naturally very familiar with the opening of an ordinary cave abode. He raised his hand and waved gently, and an invisible force appeared out of nowhere. The chaotic primordial chi on the cliff surged, like a river flowing into the sea. It kept gathering behind him, forming an increasingly large whirlpool. Along with the whirlpool, countless mountain rocks on the cliff were swept up. These mountain rocks could be in the ends of the world, and they were even wrapped in the stable, chaotic, primordial chi and soaked in it for hundreds of thousands of years. They were naturally not simple mountain rocks, nor were they the various mysterious materials in the untainted world, such as the essence of the 5 elements, warm jade, and vitality ores. Instead, it was a very strange type of mountain rock that did not seem to contain any properties. It only had the sturdiness of the mountain rock itself. At this time, Luo Fan was opening up a back road, not a temporary cave abode. Of course, he attached great importance to it. This kind of mountain rock that only had the nature of sturdiness was like a piece of white paper. Although it did not have any natural special properties, he could paint on it at will and change it at will, which made him quite satisfied. As Luo Fan moved, the surging mountain rocks continued to collapse and reform. The chaotic primordial chi that gathered behind Luo Fan, like a whirlpool, was constantly condensing and compressing in the process, turning into strands of energy lines that constantly sketched on the mountain rocks. After half a day, a huge palace that was hundreds of meters high and covered an area of thousands of acres appeared on the cliff. This huge palace was simple, as if it had experienced countless years of wind and frost, and every moment seemed to have been built at the last moment. It looked extremely mysterious. Above the main entrance of the palace, there were 4 complicated and mysterious Pangu characters. Understand the world. Chapter 181. Comprehending the mystery and finally breaking through the shackles, Luo Fan looked at the hall that occupied thousands of acres for a while. He felt that the appearance of the hall was exactly the same as the one he designed, and he was very satisfied. With a turn of his body, he entered the main hall. The inside of the hall was a different world, but the space was more than 100 times larger than the outside world. It was nearly 100,000 acres in size, like a small world. However, it looked incomparably vast, making one's state of mind open just by looking at it. However, this small world was naturally spacious, but it was lacking in vitality. In such a spacious space, other than mountains and rocks, there was only soil. Even though it was filled with grayish, smoke-like chaotic energy, it still seemed exceptionally lonely. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and the space in the hall instantly changed. Hundreds of rooms appeared out of thin air around the hall, and they were distributed around the small world. At the same time, the terrain of this small world also changed. Sometimes it was too high, and sometimes it was too low. Gradually, it formed a scene like a real land. Then, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved lightly, and a mysterious 3-dimensional talisman came out of his hand and went straight into the ground in front of him. As these 3-dimensional talismans went in, the ground in front of him seemed to turn into a liquid and suddenly produced a very strange ripple. With this ripple, protrusions appeared from the ground one after another, as if a big mouth had spat out from the ground. They flew straight up and suddenly fell, gradually forming the appearance of hundreds of middle-aged strong men in front of Luo Fan. These middle-aged strong men had slightly yellow skin, bulging muscles, and looked extremely strong. When their eyes moved, they looked quite simple and honest. They were the yellow-turbaned strongmen that Luo Fan refined through the strongman summoning method. The energy in these yellow, turbaned strongmen surged, but contained a very mysterious restriction. After the yellow turbaned strongmen formed, they did not speak and directly bowed to Luo Fan. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. These yellow, turbaned strongmen scattered around the cave house in an orderly manner and began to set up the cave house. Stone beds, stone tables, stone stools, training rooms, meditation rooms, gardens, and lakes. The primal chaos energy at the ends of the earth would not evolve on its own, but under the control of the yellow turbaned strongman, it could produce all kinds of energy, and producing water was just a simple matter, gradually took shape. Not far from Luo Fan, there were even a few yellow scarf warriors who, with the help of some very strange method, opened up a fountain that spewed out chaotic origin energy. Although these yellow turban warriors were only magic tools, they had some spiritual awareness that was neither strong nor weak. With the addition of these magical artifacts that could move, the entire cave seemed to be rather lively. Looking at this scene, Luo Fan still felt that something was missing. He frowned and thought for a while. He raised his hand, and the Wuji Palace in his sea of consciousness flashed and appeared in his hand. His mind moved slightly, and the Wuji Palace suddenly became bigger. The palace gate opened wide, and dozens of kinds of cranes, turtles, rabbits, and other seemingly elegant and interesting creatures rushed out of the palace gate. At the same time, along with these creatures, there were countless kinds of very mysterious plant seeds. Those yellow turban strongmen were magic tools, and they were naturally under the control of Luo Fan. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and they knew Luo Fan's thoughts. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen yellow turban strongmen gathered and took away the seeds and creatures that Luo Fan took out. They were taken to various gardens that were specially opened and placed in various lakes. These creatures and seeds naturally came from the small Kiliacosm inside the Wuji Palace. The small Kiliacosm was already quite complete and full of vitality. After tens of thousands of years of evolution, there were already trillions of creatures. These kinds of creatures and plant seeds were completely insignificant to this minor Kiliacosm. Although the aptitudes of these creatures were quite poor, Luo Fan did not want to find them to inherit his Tao. He only wanted to decorate the cave abode with vitality so that he would feel more comfortable staying in the cave abode. As long as they were intelligent enough, that was enough. These yellow, turban warriors were refined from the rocks of the ends of the earth, and they were born with a sturdy nature. Although Luo Fan seemed to be casually refining these yellow, turban strongmen, with his current cultivation realm, coupled with his mastery of the strongman summoning technique, the yellow turban strongmen he refined were not much different from meticulously refining. Moreover, because he casually integrated his spiritual sense into them, these yellow turban warriors were quite intelligent despite only having one restriction. With a slight thought, Luo Fan took a step forward and arrived at the core of the cave, which was a simple and unadorned room in the depths of the cave. However, it contained nearly half of the Yuan Qi in the entire cave. Sitting on the futon in this room, Luo Fan instantly felt that he was completely integrated with the entire cave. Every change in this cave abode, every bit of Yuan Qi circulation was under his absolute control. It was even to the extent that his perception was able to fuse with the entire abode. What his eyes saw was the scene outside the abode, and what his mind and consciousness sensed was the same as what the abode touched. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind moved and the mana in his body was withdrawn. The azure light that had been enshrouding his body ever since he stepped into the sky receded and disappeared without a trace. "Master, it's so comfortable here. There's no pressure." The voice of the exquisite, lowly Xuanji child echoed in Luo Fan's mind. The personality of the Xuanji child was rather lively. Among the 3 magic treasures that Luo Fan had refined, it was the only treasure spirit that would automatically speak without Luo Fan summoning. Luo Fan did not think that there was any harm in this, but he was not in the mood to chat with a treasure spirit that had no self-awareness, so he pretended not to hear it. The dark green light was withdrawn, but it meant that the protection of the Xuanji robe for him had been reduced to the lowest. However, Luo Fan did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. The terrifying pressure that they had to endure after entering the sky screen no longer existed. Knowing that this was the ability of the cave, Luo Fan did not care much. He had completely fused his senses and vision with the cave abode, observing the scenery under the cliff with the help of the cave abode, and carefully comprehending the various mysteries revealed by it. Within the sky of the end of the world was a very strange place. It was similar to heaven and earth, similar to the void of the universe, similar to the endless starry sky, but it was completely different. And this end of the world was an even more mysterious place in this strange place. It seemed to be connected to the various ends of the world and the entire untainted world in an indescribable way. By changing it with his mind, he could even see the scenery of these ends clearly. There is no need to use words to describe the mysteries contained within. One could tell just how shocking it was. At this moment, Luo Fan was only a little short of achieving a breakthrough in cultivation. The benefits of comprehending this mystery were simply indescribable. As Luo Fan comprehended these mysteries, time continued to pass. As time passed, the cave abode also underwent great changes. Those yellow turbaned strongmen listened to Luo Fan's orders and kept busy in this cave. They planted seeds, cultivated spiritual beasts, and modified the cave. 100 years passed. The small world in this cave had become like a real world, full of vitality. The fragrances of herbs from the various gardens spread throughout the small world. Various spirit beasts lived and played contentedly in this small world, illuminating the entire cave as if it was a fairyland. Another 100 years passed. This cave had already shown some vicissitudes. Every place was full of traces of the passage of time, making it seem more natural. The vitality revealed by the activities of various living beings also became more natural. During this process, Luo Fan seemed to have stiffened as he sat cross-legged at the core of the cave. He did not move at all, and there were no traces of energy fluctuations coming from his body. More than half of the primal chaos energy in the entire cave was surrounding him, but he didn't absorb any of it. It looked as if Luo Fan had turned into a lifeless statue. In the blink of an eye, 1,200 years had passed. Such a long period of time was equivalent to 876,000 years in the mini-kiliocosm. According to this method, Luo Fan had wasted more than 800,000 years in this cave to comprehend the mysteries of the ends of the earth and the mysteries of the primordial world. This was simply a reckless waste of God's gifts. However, Luo Fan felt that this waste was worth it. This was because through 1,200 years of comprehension, he discovered that the feeling of being on the verge of a breakthrough, but it was always just a little bit away, had completely disappeared. The cocoon that existed in his heart suddenly collapsed one day after he entered the state of enlightenment for 1,200 years. Something that was nurtured in his heart finally took shape. It broke free from all restrictions and descended into the world. It was as if he had broken a shackle that had locked him for countless years. A feeling of incomparable freedom and relaxation filled his mind. With the appearance of this feeling, the Dharma power in his body began to change in a mysterious and wonderful way. With this change, the energy that had accumulated around him for the past 1,200 years, which was so dense that it almost condensed into a substance, seemed to be attracted by a black hole. It crazily poured into his body and was constantly twisted, purified, and absorbed by his gradually changing Dharma power. In just an instant, a huge whirlpool appeared around him. With this whirlpool, more and more chaotic energy rushed from all over the cave and gathered in his room. At the same time, the cave constantly absorbed the chaotic energy from the ends of the earth. Chapter 182. Turning into nothingness. Great change of spirit. This scene was beyond common sense, and it was even more magnificent and astonishing. In just a few breaths, the chaotic yuan qi that Luo Fan had absorbed into his body had reached a level that he would have needed several years to completely absorb in the past. In the process, he didn't even feel the slightest bit uncomfortable or too fast, and even felt that the speed of absorption was far from the limits of what he could achieve. It made his magical energy units emit a feeling of utter emptiness. Endless energy poured into his body, constantly being twisted by his magic power, constantly purified, and finally filled into his magic power units that had already undergone some kind of mysterious change. With the influx of this pure energy, the magic power units that Luo Fan had originally felt extremely empty because of the breakthrough gradually became full. The mantra of the nameless divine method flowed through his mind, and the magic power in his body completely flowed according to the route of the nameless divine method. A feeling of cultivation rapidly increasing with the passage of time emerged in his mind, making him feel extremely comfortable. There was no need to comprehend the mysteries of the outside world. With a slight thought, the limitless void palace in the world of his consciousness suddenly shook, and that thing appeared above his head. With another turn, a door completely swallowed his body, making him instantly disappear from the cave dwelling of heaven enlightenment. When he reappeared, he was already in the minor kiliacosm inside the limitless void palace, right on the central platform of the thunder pool in this minor kiliacosm. As his figure entered the minor kiliacosm, the limitless void palace that floated above the praying mat suddenly turned and madly absorbed the endless chaotic yuan qi around it. The terrifying absorption speed was tens of times faster than Luo Fan's own absorption speed. In just the blink of an eye, because the chaotic yuan qi in the room disappeared too fast, a vacuum area was formed. It was because all the chaotic yuan qi had been completely absorbed by him, and the chaotic yuan qi from the outside world still hadn't had time to replenish it. Thus, the speed of the limitless void palace's absorption of the chaotic yuan qi could be imagined. As the chaotic yuan qi in the room disappeared, the chaotic yuan qi in the minor kiliacosm crazily circulated, causing all kinds of creatures in this minor kiliacosm to panic. At the same time, the suction force produced by the palace at the top of the mysterious cliff became even more terrifying. The chaotic yuan qi that rushed towards the cliff from all corners of the world suddenly increased in speed by tens of times. It looked like the originally gentle flow of water had suddenly turned into a turbulent torrent. These streams of chaotic energy completely submerged the palace, and from all parts of the palace, through some kind of mysterious connection, poured into the palace, and then like countless huge water dragons, directly rushed into the core of the cave dwelling, and poured into the void of Wuji Palace. After the chaotic yuan qi was poured into the palace, it directly passed through the dimensional realm and entered the kiliacosm through the central portal. It formed a huge gray light pillar, falling from the sky and covering the platform where Luo Fan was and madly pouring into kiliacosm. Limitless kiliacosm qi. Of qi into the kiliacosm with these two accelerations. Luo Fan felt that the speed of his absorption of the chaotic yuan qi had increased by several times. The feeling that the primordial energy was flowing too slowly in his mind instantly disappeared. The magic power units in his body were being enriched at an unimaginable speed. This process of replenishing energy lasted for 10,000 years. During these 10,000 years, Luo Fan's mind was constantly running the mantra of the nameless cultivation method. The magic power in his body was also constantly flowing along the route of the nameless cultivation method. This kind of movement made his mind seem to be in a trance, as if there was endless information constantly fusing into his soul. In these 10,000 years, he didn't have a moment to break away from this trance, as if there was endless information fusing into his mind. Meanwhile, after the magical power units in his body absorbed the chaotic energy for 10,000 years, the feeling of extreme emptiness had completely disappeared. An indescribable sense of fullness gradually filled his entire mind and will. With this endless chaotic yuan qi, the mysterious changes in the magic power units in Luo Fan's body that had occurred 10,000 years ago became more obvious. Under these mysterious changes, each of the magical power units seemed to have grown a little stronger. The three-dimensional talisman that was outlined by the energy lines and shaped like Buzhou Mountain seemed to have become much more mysterious, and its structure was several times more complicated than before. This kind of change made the three-dimensional seal talisman more like the real Buzhou Mountain. If he looked at each talisman with a microscope, he would be able to see that each talisman was more than one zhang in size, cave, grass, and trees. This day was one day after he had comprehended the mystery for 10,000 years. Luo Fan suddenly felt that the magic power in his body had become extremely abundant. It seemed that no matter how much he absorbed, he couldn't absorb any more chaotic yuan qi. With a thought, he knew that his karma was almost complete. With a thought, the magic power that had been circulating in his body for 10,000 years suddenly shrank and converged, condensing into a strange fruit in his lower abdomen. It was mysterious and wonderful. It contained the endless source of life, as if it was formed by the condensation of the great Tao of heaven and earth. It contained infinite principles and possessed infinite power. It was the earthly immortal's fruit of Wei. However, the earthly immortal's fruit of Wei now was no longer the same as before. Not only was its shape more mysterious and its power more magical, even its state of existence was completely different from before. The fruit of Wei's existence in the past was unimaginably strong, as if it was constantly showing its existence to all things in the world. Anyone who glanced at it would be involuntarily attracted by it. But now, this fruit of Wei had become illusory and real. It seemed to exist in a completely independent existence in the world, but it also seemed to be just a shadow of nothingness. It even revealed a special characteristic that caused others to overlook it, and it practically caused others to be unable to remember its form. Shockingly, the earthly immortal's Tao fruit had become illusory after it broke through this time, and it represented that Luo Fan had broken through the earthly immortal realm and attained the golden immortal realm. This golden immortal realm was already at the peak of the earthly immortal's Tao fruit. If he wanted to break through again, then besides tempering the Tao fruit and increasing his magic power, he could only obtain the primordial Tao fruit. Along with this profound Tao fruit taking form once more, a profound and unfathomable aura emanated from the Tao fruit to fill his entire lower abdomen that was like a bag, and then it spread out through the 1,296 meridians on the walls of the bag. In the end, it affected every single meridian, every inch of skin, every inch of bone marrow, every inch of internal organs, and every inch of blood essence within his entire body. In the end, it poured into his body and charged into the world within his sea of consciousness through some sort of mysterious and unfathomable connection. With the influx of his profound aura, the world within Luo Fan's sea of consciousness suddenly shook. Loud rumbles rang out from it, and the originally extremely stable sea of consciousness gradually collapsed. In the blink of an eye, an earth-shattering change had occurred. The heavens and the earth grew rapidly. The sky constantly rose, and the earth constantly widened. Among them, the topography of the earth became even more complicated and natural. Various green plants covered almost every part of the world, causing the sea of consciousness to appear to be full of vitality. Occasionally, when the magic power flowed, it seemed to bring about a breeze, and there was actually the fragrance of plants that assailed the nose. This profound aura reverberated throughout the sea of consciousness, and the more it accumulated, the denser it became. Gradually, the entire sea of consciousness was filled with this aura. Along with this aura, the huge mountain peak that stood at the center of the sea of consciousness with an indomitable spirit also underwent a very subtle, but mysterious and indescribable change. It was as if there were two invisible giant hands kneading clay like a clay artist, constantly kneading and stretching the huge mountain peak, causing its shape to gradually undergo some kind of mysterious change. In this process, the countless threads that outline the mountain peak underwent an unimaginably complex reorganization. When the aura that filled the entire sea of consciousness was so dense that it almost condensed into a substance, and the sea of consciousness was expanded to a height of 90,000 miles and a radius of 90,000 miles, the strange mountain peak formed by the spirit had completely changed into another form. It had become a spine, a giant spine that was 90,000 miles long, the bottom of which was fixed on the earth, and the top of which was supporting the sky. A desolate and unyielding aura that was almost condensed into a substance instantly emanated from the giant spine. It intertwined with the aura that was emitted from the earthly immortal's fruit of way, which had already permeated the entire sea of consciousness and was almost condensed into a substance. They intertwined and fused together, producing some kind of extremely mysterious change. This change caused the aura to become a kind of firm awareness, which gradually filled the entire sea of consciousness. Then, through a mysterious place, it rushed out of the sea of consciousness, swept through the meridians in his body, and finally flowed into the earthly immortal's fruit of way that seemed both real and illusory. With the influx of this firm awareness, the earthly immortal's fruit of way became even more illusory and even more elusive. The 518,400 three-dimensional talismans that formed the earthly immortal's fruit of way also became fuller, and the shape of the Buzhou mountain also became more complete. This firm awareness had completely fused the earthly immortal's fruit of way with a spirit that had transformed into a spine. The connection between the two had become stronger than ever. The interaction between the two had become unprecedentedly powerful. After this change, every time the earthly immortal's fruit of way expanded and contracted, every vibration, every change could be clearly seen on the spine formed by the spirit. And every fluctuation of the spine could also be seen in the earthly immortal's fruit of way. Chapter 183. Divine Might of the Tao Fruit. White Lotus Demon in Luo Fan's spiritual world, the spine that stood erect on the ground was Pan Gu's spine. It was because when Luo Fan broke through the realm of true immortality, his divine soul had undergone a fundamental change. The Buzhou mountain, which was transformed by his divine soul, returned to its origin and was pushed back to Pangu's spine. Pangu was an extraordinary existence who created the untainted world, and the spine was the strongest and most important part of the Khanate Taoist body. Therefore, the firmness of Pangu's spine was much stronger than that of Buzhou mountain. Moreover, because it was a spine instead of mountain rock, it was more flexible and lively, and possessed all kinds of power that Buzhou mountain could not have. This Pan Gu spine stood in Ji Hao's spiritual space like a giant dragon that froze the entire world. It had been releasing an insufferably arrogant aura all the time, as if the entire spiritual space was nothing but a floating cloud around this giant dragon, and the entire spiritual space was attached to this giant dragon. Above the sea of consciousness, the dusky sky stopped rolling. It was no longer as if it could fall down at any moment. Instead, it appeared extremely firm and stable, as if it had been completely fixed in place. The mystery of Pangu's spine could be imagined. Under the cleansing of that resolute awareness, Luo Fan's body once again received an extremely strong tempering. The strength of his body, which had already been raised to an extremely terrifying realm, was once again enhanced. Not only did his toughness increase, but all kinds of incredible magical abilities were also developed. Luo Fan sensed the state of his body and knew that everything had been stabilized. He suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Open!" As he shouted, the earthly immortal's Tao fruit in his lower dantian shook slightly, and an extremely mysterious power was emitted from it. Under the effect of this power, the space within a radius of hundreds of feet around his body was instantly shattered. His figure left the minor kiliacosm and appeared in the palace-like medium kiliacosm. However, Even the dimensional realm couldn't withstand the shock waves from his Earth celestial Tao fruit. The moment he appeared, the space around him instantly shattered. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the dimensional realm. When he reappeared, he was already in the cave dwelling. Even though he had broken through 2 worlds, the aftershock of the Earth immortal Tao fruits shaking was still very strong. This cave dwelling was clearly much more stable than a dimensional realm, but it still wasn't able to withstand it. Although it didn't instantly shatter, it still wasn't able to maintain its flatness. The space in a radius of several hundred feet around him began to distort, as if an invisible hand had rolled it into a ball and then stretched it out. After some time, the aftermath of this shock dissipated. The minor dimensions, the dimensional dimensions, and the space within the heavenly enlightenment cave were also smoothed out, gradually returning to normal. Seeing the whole process, Luo Fan was very satisfied in his heart. At this time, he still wasn't completely sure about the power of the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, but the power that was instinctively revealed already had such a terrifying power, which was enough to satisfy a picky person like him. Lifting his head to look at the Wuji Palace, he immediately noticed a hole the size of a speck of dust had appeared right below the palace. Around the hole, there were countless spiderweb-like cracks spreading out one after another. In the process, he could even hear the painful cries of the Limitless Boy, who had merged with the Limitless Void Palace and was a part of the Limitless Void Palace, suppressing the medium space. Luo Fan didn't feel sorry for the Limitless Boy. For the Limitless Boy, who had no self-consciousness, Luo Fan didn't have enough feelings to treat him as a real creature, even if he looked like a real creature. However, although he didn't feel sorry in his heart, he also knew that these holes and cracks were caused by him going in and out of common sense, so he needed to be responsible for it. Therefore, Luo Fan's expression didn't change. He raised his hand and waved up. In the blink of an eye, there was a mysterious light emitted from his hand. It instantly covered the Limitless Void Palace. As the mysterious light flickered, there was an extremely mysterious repair power that completely closed the hole and the countless tiny spiderweb-like cracks around it, making the Limitless Void Palace complete again. At this point, the Limitless Boy, who was screaming in pain, stopped breathing. Knowing that the Limitless Void Palace had been completely repaired, Luo Fan stood up and raised his hand. The Limitless Void Palace turned into an earthy yellow light and suddenly rushed through the Niwen Palace between his eyebrows, straight into his mini-universe that was full of vitality. With another flash, it became 10,000 feet high and stood in front of the huge spine. At the same time, it emitted a mysterious aura, constantly swallowing the firm awareness that filled the entire sea of consciousness. In the process, it produced some mysterious and wonderful changes. Luo Fan had been swallowing the chaotic qi in the mini-dimension for more than 10,000 years. But for the outside world, it was only a little more than 13 years. It was even less than 14 years. Compared to this primitive world, compared to the concept of time at the ends of the earth, it was not much longer than the blink of an eye. In such a short period of time, it was naturally impossible for this mini-dimension to have too many changes. However, after all, Luo Fan hadn't paid attention to this mini-dimension for more than 1,200 years. At this moment, seeing that this mini-dimension had become so prosperous and full of vitality, he couldn't help but feel a touch of joy in his heart. With a single step, he exited the training room. After a few more steps, he had already walked around this mini-dimension. Finally, he stopped next to a lake that was 10 acres in size. There was a lotus in the middle of this lake. There were 3 white lotuses on it. It was swallowing the rich, chaotic qi in this mini-dimension. It had actually developed a simple soul consciousness and knew how to cultivate. Although the power of Luo Fan's great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes had been greatly reduced, it only affected his comprehension of the mysteries of the great desolation world and the mysteries of the ends of the earth. For this kind of uncomplicated creature, his eyes were still invincible. Therefore, with just a glance, he could tell that the soul consciousness of this white lotus was not something else. Under the influence of the rich, chaotic chi in the mini-dimension, it was formed by the continuous transformation and evolution of the ordinary white lotus. It could be said that it was a kind of extremely rare postnatal soul consciousness at the beginning of the world. I didn't expect that the rules of heaven and earth at the ends of the earth would be so different from the primitive world. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. He naturally knew that if this white lotus was in the primitive world, no matter how good the environment was, it would only continue to grow, the material would continue to strengthen, and the power it contained would continue to increase. If it wanted to produce a soul consciousness, it would probably not be possible even if it was given dozens of yuan wei. However, the soul consciousness that was produced over a long period of time would be thousands of times stronger than the soul consciousness produced at this time. It would be thousands of times easier to cultivate, and its achievements in the future would be countless times higher. As for which of the two was better, it depended on the person's opinion. It seems that I don't have to worry about the lack of vitality in the future. Luo Fan came to a conclusion in his heart. He was too lazy to care about how the white lotus cultivated. With just one step, he was out of the cave of enlightenment. He stood on the edge of the cliff outside the cave of enlightenment. Finally, for the first time in a long time, he saw the scene of the primitive world below the cliff. The terrifying pressure of the strange world inside the sky curtain still existed. As soon as he was out of the cave of enlightenment, Luo Fan felt his body become heavy, as if there were hundreds of millions of tons of power being added to his body out of thin air. If it was in the past, even if his body didn't collapse under the pressure of this force, he would immediately fall to the ground. But at this moment, along with the appearance of this force, the earthly immortal's fruit of the way in his body automatically trembled slightly. As it trembled, the force that weighed hundreds of millions of tons was instantly eliminated, and it couldn't affect him in the slightest. After more than 1,200 years, Luo Fan once again saw the mysterious scene at the bottom of the cliff with his own eyes. However, he didn't have the impatience he had in the past, and he didn't have the desire to immediately comprehend the truth of the Grand Tao. This change in his mindset caused him to feel a sense of admiration. He stood on top of the cliff and quietly looked at the scene of the untainted land in the image. He looked at the constantly changing light and shadow that changed according to his will. He appreciated all kinds of wonders that he had never seen or even thought of before. His mind seemed quite calm. Although he had already broken through the true immortal realm of the earth immortal Tao fruit and achieved the golden immortal realm, he was still a golden immortal. However, his cultivation of the Pangu chaotic heavenly pupil did not improve much. In this place, it was still greatly weakened, and its power to illuminate the origin was greatly reduced. Under such circumstances, although his eyes flickered with golden and silver light, he didn't receive any more information. What he saw was still the various mysteries that he had comprehended in the past 1,200 years. It's a pity that I can only observe the scene within hundreds of millions of miles of the extreme of the untainted land from here. If I could go a step further and see the entire untainted land, how great would it be? Luo Fan sighed with some dissatisfaction. The area that the image below could show was vast and boundless. It was so vast that if he wanted to carefully look at every location, it would take him hundreds of thousands of years. However, the light and shadow that it could show was only the area that was hundreds of millions of miles wide in the extreme of the untainted land. Although there were many wonders that could be seen, they couldn't represent everything in the entire untainted land. It would be a dream if he wanted to use this scene to observe the entire untainted land and comprehend the entire untainted land. After sighing for a while, Luo Fan calmed himself down. He raised his hand and waved lightly. The light and shadow below continued to change and flow. In the end, it stopped at the scene of the extreme northwest of the untainted land. Seeing that the scene had stopped, Luo Fan didn't stop. He leaped up and turned into a long rainbow that shot towards the light and shadow below. Chapter 184. The moment Luo Fan rushed into the light. The moment Luo Fan rushed into the light, a strange change suddenly occurred. It was as if a very mysterious mechanism was suddenly guiding his movements and the direction he was moving in. The long rainbow that he had transformed into unknowingly streaked across the void in a very mysterious trajectory that seemed to be evolving the endless great Tao of the world. Following this mysterious and unpredictable trajectory, he suddenly felt as if he was passing through an unimaginably long passageway and was constantly being cast toward a certain place in the light. From the outside world's point of view, at least from the ends of the Earth's point of view, this long rainbow formed by Luo Fan was moving in a complicated and profound path within the light and shadow, constantly becoming smaller and smaller, constantly fusing with the light and shadow. After half a day, the long rainbow had already flown hundreds of millions of kilometers in his perception. Only then did Luo Fan feel that the mysterious guiding mechanism had suddenly disappeared. After the guiding mechanism disappeared, his body regained control again, and he suddenly rushed forward. After passing through an invisible barrier as easily as passing through a water curtain, the pressure that had enveloped him for more than 1,000 years and the hundreds of millions of tons of power that had been added to his body after he left the cave residence had completely disappeared in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the primordial energy that appeared around his body had once again become extremely chaotic. He raised his head and looked at the sky. The sun was hanging in the distant sky. When he lowered his head and looked down, he saw a boundless, gray, and chaotic ocean. However, he had already passed through the light and returned to the primordial world. Looking back, the sea and sky were boundless. He could not see the scene where the heavens and the earth merged, nor could he see the sky that hung high in the sky. It looked boundless, as if it was enveloping the entire primordial world. That sudden feeling almost made him feel a little dazed. With a slight movement of his mind, Luo Fan could already feel that at the edge of the world that seemed to be incomparably far away, yet also seemed to be right around his body, he could even feel the cave abode on top of a strange cliff. It turns out that for me, the ends of the earth are no longer the ends of the earth. Luo Fan seemed to have understood something. He knew that as long as he moved his mind, a mysterious guiding force would appear, allowing him to directly break through the space of the untainted world and go straight to the ends of the earth. The ends of the earth that he had already reached were no longer the ends of the world to him. Although there were no signs at his current location, and the surrounding environment seemed to have changed for millions of miles, it was exactly the same as any other location. However, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had reached an unimaginable level. He only needed to slightly sense the various auras left in the void to instantly know where he was, and he also knew which direction to go to get to the untainted world. Luo Fan's current location was impressively at the extreme northwest of the untainted world. The sea surface that was 300 million miles away from the place where the heavens and the earth merged was also the furthest place from the extreme northwest of the world that could be seen from the ends of the earth. Wanting to try the changes in the power of the great sun golden eyes and the bright moon silver eyes, Luo Fan's heart moved. As his eyes moved, endless information flowed through his mind. That incomparably familiar feeling of seeing through everything made him feel quite comfortable. At the same time, he also felt a trace of worry buried in the bottom of his heart. But I can't rely too much on the eyes. Otherwise, if the eyes are restricted in the future, it will be terrible. He thought of the encounter in the gray sky and secretly made a decision in his heart. With this decision, his mind moved slightly, and he operated a kind of incantation recorded in the Pangu chaotic heavenly pupils. In an instant, 2 units of Dharma power rushed out of the earthly immortal's Tao fruit, circulated 81 times around the meridians in his body, turned into a faint black fog, and rushed straight into his eyes. As the black fog rushed into his eyes, a faint black light appeared in the depths of his eyes and instantly covered the bright moon silver eyes and the great sun golden eyes, so that his eyes returned to normal black. As his eyes turned black, the information that was constantly surging into his mind and consciousness through his eyes completely disappeared in an instant. Looking around, he found that there was no difference from the ends of the earth. Luo Fan then let out a long sigh, and with a shake of his body, turned into a long rainbow, and quickly headed for the distant, untainted world. Master, Master, this is the untainted world. It's so comfortable, so carefree. It's much better than the ends of the earth. Can you let me out to play? Can you? It was the first time a Xuanji child had entered the primordial world, so he was rather excited. He kept talking in Luo Fan's mind. Luo Fan was already used to the Xuanji child behavior, but he was too lazy to care about her. The long rainbow that he had transformed into rushed to the untainted world without a care. After he made a breakthrough and became a golden immortal, his flying speed was more than 10 times faster than before. With this speed, it only took him less than half a day to cross hundreds of millions of miles from the northwest of the untainted world to the untainted world. The rough outline of the Buzhou mountain in the distance appeared in his eyes again. With a shake of his body, Luo Fan had already landed on a cliff that was thousands of meters high by the sea. Looking back, the boundless blue waves and the boundless sea came into view. In the endless distance, the sea and the sky met, forming a very special scene. At the same time, as the Yuan Qi surged, the waves slightly rippled, appearing incomparably magnificent. It made people who looked at it involuntarily feel a sense of heroism, and, at the same time, a sense of insignificance. After comfortably enjoying the impact of the boundless sea on his soul, Luo Fan suddenly felt a sudden inspiration. After the increase in his realm, Luo Fan could more clearly grasp the sudden inspiration. At this moment, he didn't even need to calculate. He could roughly know that this time, his sudden inspiration was triggered by Lin Tian. His heart moved slightly, and the mantra of the yin-yang test method flowed through his mind. At the same time, as his right hand moved, countless obscure information flowed through his mind. It constantly collapsed, constantly reorganized, and finally turned into countless light shadows. What was different from before was that because of the breakthrough in his cultivation realm, the information that he could perceive was more than 10 times more than before. The light shadows that were produced were also much more detailed than before, and this allowed Luo Fan to understand the source of the sudden inspiration even more clearly, to the point that it could be said to be completely detailed. So he's already broken through to the 9th level of the spirit gathering realm. This speed is really faster than I imagined. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. At this time, Lin Tian had already left the valley that Luo Fan had opened up for him to live in, and was walking with the yellow-turbaned strongman across the wilderness. Looking at his current location, it had been nearly 100 years since he had left that place. Back then, he said, "If I can't change my fate, I'll return indefinitely," but I didn't think that he would only need 1,000 years to break through to the 9th level of the spirit gathering realm. It's a good thing that more than 800,000 years have passed in the spirit gathering realm. There are no longer any things that he's familiar with. Luo Fan thought in his heart. Back then, he had made a promise that if Lin Tian wanted to have a chance to return to the spirit gathering realm, he would have to wait until he broke through to the 9th level of the spirit gathering realm and reached the realm of changing his fate. Now that Lin Tian had broken through, he naturally wouldn't go back on his word. After making up his mind, Luo Fan identified Lin Tian's location. His body shook, and he had already turned into a long rainbow, directly rushing towards Lin Tian's location. At this time, Lin Tian was leading, or rather, climbing a 100,000 feet tall mountain under the protection of a yellow-turbaned strongman. This mountain was tens of thousands of miles away from the valley that he lived in. In the middle, there were many large rivers, tens of thousands of mountains, and all kinds of harsh terrain. Just by looking at this scene, one could tell that Lin Tian had put in a lot of effort to get from the valley to here. Although Lin Tian had already broken through to the 9th level of the spirit gathering realm, his current strength was only equivalent to the core formation realm. Even though he was still tens of thousands of miles away from the godly fire, his strength was definitely at the bottom of the chaotic world. Compared to the yellow-turbaned strongman beside him, who only had 3 restrictions, he was only a little bit stronger. Of course, although he was a little bit stronger than the Yellow Turban Strongman, if he really fought with the Yellow Turban Strongman, only death awaited him. After all, this Yellow Turban Strongman was a magic tool that Luo Fan had refined, and the spirituality it contained was not simple. Moreover, before he left the valley, he had absorbed the mountain protecting formation that Luo Fan had placed into his body. At this time, he could use it to attack and defend at any time. In addition, Lin Tian Nan was a warrior. Although he had already reached the first level of changing his fate, he had very few methods to deal with magic tool attacks. In a battle, it would be very difficult for him to last long against the Yellow Turban Strongman. Old Huang, I feel very tired. Can I rest for a bit? At this time, the man in the magic tool had already arrived at a platform that was 80,000 feet above the ground. Lin Tian Nan's body was limp, and he laid on the ground, unwilling to get up. Sir Tian Nan, my suggestion is to continue forward. The Yellow Turban Strongman said expressionlessly. I'm tired. I can't walk anymore. Lin Tian Nan still refused to get up. I insist on my own opinion. The Yellow Turban Strongman had no intention of changing his mind. I'm not going, I suggest. One man and one magic tool began to argue on the platform without any substance. Or, it should be said that Lin Tian Nan refused to leave, and the Yellow Turban Strongman did not impatiently try to persuade him. This was Lin Tian Nan's only entertainment other than cultivation in the past 1,000 years. The Yellow Turban Strongman did not have any self-awareness, but it had the ability to think, it had intelligence, it had emotions, it had feelings. These characteristics made it seem very strange. All of its behaviors were the same as a normal person's, but when combined, it always made people feel a little awkward. This made Lin Tian Nan, in his loneliness, focus his attention on it and treat it like a real creature. Chapter 185. Breaking the shackles and changing the second layer of fate. When Luo Fan arrived at the top of the mountain where Lin Tian Nan was, what he saw was the scene of Lin Tian Nan and the yellow scarf warrior entangled. Shaking his head slightly, Luo Fan pressed down on the rainbow. His figure landed and condensed, directly appearing on the platform where Lin Tian Nan and the yellow turban warrior were. Lin Tian Nan and the yellow scarf warrior were entangled. Suddenly, the sunlight in front of him dimmed. Without him noticing, a figure appeared beside him. In his shock, he didn't even have time to see the person's appearance. He flipped over and stood up. The true qi in his body surged, and countless amounts of chaotic yuan qi gathered in his hands. It transformed into an incomparably condensed and powerful giant fist. With a shake of his hand, he was about to smash the figure. At this moment, his eyes flashed, and he finally saw the person's appearance. He finally realized that it was the figure he had been waiting for over 1,000 years. His face turned pale with fright, and he hurriedly dispersed the giant fist in his hands. He flipped over and bowed down, saying, Tian Nan greets Master. May Master live a long life. When Lin Tian Nan realized that the person was Luo Fan, the yellow scarf warrior also noticed Luo Fan's arrival. However, it didn't open its mouth to greet him. Instead, it flipped over and bowed down, as if it was a simple thing. It had been refined by Lin Tian Nan for over 1,200 years and had long become Lin Tian Nan's weapon. It didn't have much of a sense of belonging to Luo Fan, the person who refined it. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about this weapon that he had casually refined and was too lazy to care about it. He lifted his hand, and an invisible force appeared out of thin air, slowly lifting Lin Tian Nan up from the ground. He said, Tian Nan, I am very satisfied that you were able to break through to the 9th layer of the spirit-gathering realm in 1,100 years. This disciple is ashamed. After spending so much time to break through, I have let Master down. Lin Tian Nan said with an embarrassed expression after receiving Luo Fan's praise. At this moment, his eyes were filled with admiration as he looked at Luo Fan. It was the same as when he trained under Luo Fan tens of thousands of years ago. After Lin Tian Nan stood up, the yellow scarf warrior also stood up and followed Lin Tian Nan closely. breaking through in 1100 years is already extremely rare. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm really satisfied, said Luo Fan with a smile. As Lin Tian Nan listened to Luo Fan's words, he finally believed that his master was truly satisfied. His face was filled with joy and excitement. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled. He did not dwell on this matter and began to inquire about Lin Tian Nan's cultivation state. Lin Tian Nan had been cultivating alone for more than 1,000 years. The true Heaven Martial God chapter was also extremely mysterious. Naturally, he had accumulated many problems over the past 1,000 years. Now that he had received Luo Fan's inquiry, how could he not understand? He did not hold back and asked all the problems that he had encountered and asked Luo Fan to answer them for him. Luo Fan's cultivation realm was extremely high. Solving the problems that Lin Tian Nan, who was equivalent to core formation, had encountered was as easy as flipping his hand. With his casual guidance, Lin Tian Nan had encountered all kinds of problems that had puzzled him for decades, hundreds of years, and even thousands of years were easily solved. Furthermore, the various thoughts that were revealed allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the essence of the true Heaven Martial God chapter. All kinds of martial arts mysteries that he originally thought he had completely understood suddenly emerged with countless new mysteries. This made Lin Tian Nan feel as if his own martial arts realm had also increased to a certain extent. With just this conversation, although his strength had not increased because of the increase in his martial arts realm, the strength that he could display had increased by at least one level. Immersing himself in the martial way, Lin Tian Nan's eyes shone with all kinds of brilliance. The boredom that he felt when he bickered with the yellow scarf warrior had completely disappeared. Lin Tian Nan had lived for more than 15,000 years. Such a long period of time had already filled his heart with vicissitudes of life. This allowed him to see through almost all the ways of the world. He had long become tired of all the entertainment that he could enjoy. For the current Lin Tian Nan, other than the curiosity he had towards the completely unfamiliar world, only the pursuit of martial arts and immersing himself in the principles of martial arts could arouse his interest. The martial arts mysteries contained in Luo Fan's casual guidance far surpassed Lin Tian Nan's comprehension. Listening to Luo Fan's words, it was as if he had been thrown into a sea of martial arts to swim freely. This kind of feeling made him unable to stop even if he wanted to. In the blink of an eye, 7 days and 7 nights had passed between the master and disciple. Having lived for more than 15,000 years, Lin Tian Nan had long been used to not treating time as time. In addition, he was already at the first stage of the life-changing realm. Although his strength was at the bottom of the world, he was still quite strong. A few days and nights to him were basically the same as a few hours. Naturally, there was nothing wrong with it. This was even more so for Luo Fan. It took him tens of thousands of years to cultivate and absorb the chaotic energy to replenish the Fa Li units in his body. Relatively speaking, 7 days and nights was not much longer than the blink of an eye. Therefore, during these 7 days and nights, the two of them talked nonstop without stopping for a moment. During this process, although Luo Fan only occasionally demonstrated various martial arts mysteries, it still caused extremely serious consequences. At the very least, the platform that the two of them were on right now had already expanded by more than 10 times. The surrounding flowers, plants, and trees that were originally formed from the essence of the wood element were completely destroyed. Not even ashes were left behind. On this day, Lin Tian Nan finally realized that his mind was unbearably full. It was as if he could no longer absorb even a shred of martial arts mysteries. Only then did he reluctantly stop asking for help. He bowed down and said, "Thank you, Master, for teaching me. Why did you become a kowtowing bug again?" Luo Fan raised his hand and said. These words were very similar to what he had said the last time they met. In an instant, Lin Tian Nan recalled the various scenes of him and Luo Fan. An indescribable feeling of childish affection welled up in his heart. His heart, which had become firm and clear because of these years of living alone and practicing martial arts, also had a slight ripple. The rims of his eyes slightly reddened. Disciple really can't control himself. Lin Tian then lowered his head and said. Luo Fan's senses were extremely sharp. Even without using the golden sun pupils and bright moon silver pupils, he could still easily see through Lin Tiannan's thoughts. He sighed in his heart that Lin Tiannan's heart wasn't strong enough. At the same time, a faint warmth welled up in his heart. Compared to his other disciples, including his son, Luo Fu, Lin Tiannan's aptitude was the worst and his starting point was the lowest. However, he was the most emotional. He was also the closest to the ordinary people that Luo Fan had met before he crossed over. Luo Fan felt a sense of closeness. With this thought, Lin Tiannan smiled and said, You and I are master and disciple. We're the closest people to each other. Why do you have to do this? Disciple understands. Lin Tiannan nodded. Luo Fan raised his hand and lightly waved. A door that was 3 feet wide appeared in front of Lin Tiannan. Lin Tiannan hadn't reached the stage where he could feel the fluctuations of space in the chaos world. His eyes flashed, and he realized that a door had appeared in front of him. He couldn't help but be surprised and raise his head to ask Luo Fan. This is the door that leads to the minor kiliocosm. If you want to see the minor kiliocosm that gave birth to you, you only need to step through this door. Luo Fan said calmly. Inside is my hometown. Lin Tiannan's face revealed an expression of nervousness and excitement. However, there was also a slight hesitation on his face. In terms of location, it is correct. However, the time is not right. Although you have been here for more than 1,000 years, in this minor kiliocosm, 870,000 years have already passed. Everything that you are familiar with no longer exists. Luo Fan said calmly. Lin Tiannan's expression changed. In an instant, an incomparably painful expression appeared on his face. It was as if he had lost something extremely precious. When he left this minor kiliocosm, he had already lived in it for more than 14,000 years. Almost all of his relatives and friends had died a long time ago. However, it was still a world that he was completely familiar with. To him, in that world, there were still his descendants, the environment that he was familiar with, and the descendants of all of his friends that he cared about. All of these made him feel an indescribable sense of belonging to that world. Thus, even if he did not have the relatives and friends that he was familiar with, he still felt that this world was his hometown. This world had an incomparably close connection with him. However, at this moment, after leaving that world for more than 1,000 years, he was told that 870,000 years had already passed in that world. He was told that everything that he was familiar with had already disappeared. To Lin Tiannan, this kind of feeling was like a bolt from the blue. It made him feel as if he had fallen into an abyss. Luo Fan raised his eyes and looked at Lin Tiannan. He quietly waited for Lin Tiannan to think it through. He did not have a trace of impatience. His cultivation level allowed him to clearly see through every thought in Lin Tiannan's heart. He completely grasped every change in Lin Tiannan's heart. At this moment, Lin Tiannan's heart was filled with countless thoughts. It was simply like a pot of paste. It had reached a point where it could not be cleaned up. However, what made Luo Fan extremely satisfied and gratified was that among these countless thoughts, not a single one was dissatisfied with Luo Fan. Not a single one was resentful towards Luo Fan. After a long while, Lin Tiannan finally managed to sort out his chaotic thoughts and form a clear idea. He finally made a decision. I want to go and take a look. Even if the civilization of that world is completely different, that is still my hometown. Lin Tiannan looked at Luo Fan with a determined gaze and said, Following Lin Tiannan's words, his body suddenly emitted an extremely mysterious aura. This aura, compared to the aura emitted from Luo Fan's body, was like comparing the light of a firefly to the bright moon. However, it had a special meaning, as if it was displaying some kind of mysterious martial arts theory. Following this aura, the true energy in Lin Tiannan's body surged. The surrounding Xiantian Yuan Qi continuously poured into his body, transforming into incomparably pure and condensed true energy. It continuously broke through several barriers, pushing his ability to a whole new realm. Chapter 186. Evolution of Civilization. High Martial Cultivation. The true Heaven Martial Divine chapter had 3 realms: Spirit Gathering, Fate Changing, and Sky Martial Arts. Among them, each realm was further divided into 9 small realms, making a total of 27 small realms. These 27 small realms were not differentiated by attacking power, destructive power, or even lifespan. Even though the entire untainted world was filled with endless primordial chi, and living beings that could breathe primordial chi could only live and not die, their life essence still had a specific limit to their lifespan. Even though the difference could not be seen now, once the primordial chi dissipated, a huge difference could be seen. Instead, they were differentiated by the difference in martial realms and the quality of life essence. As a result, the gap between these 3 realms was different in both strength and strength. For example, the first realm of life changing that he had cultivated was only 100 times stronger than the first realm of spirit gathering when he had just broken through the void. But once he broke through the 9th realm of life changing and reached the first realm of heaven martial arts, he would be equivalent to the crossing disaster realm. Compared to the first realm of life changing, which was equivalent to core formation, he would be more than 10,000 times stronger. What awaited him next were the 9 small realms of the Sky Martial Arts realm. Each small realm would trigger a heavenly tribulation. Finally, when he reached the 9th realm of life-changing, he would achieve the body of heaven martial arts, which was equivalent to attaining the fruit of the earth immortal. Compared to the 9th realm of life-changing, it was only 1,000 times stronger. At this time, Lin Tian Nan used the struggle of the door to the small thousand world to refine his spirit. Finally, he broke through the shackles that had remained in his heart for thousands of years. In an instant, his martial arts skills improved greatly, and he directly broke through to the 2nd realm of life-changing. This was already equivalent to the primal core mastery, which was more than 5 times stronger than the first tier of life-changing realm. In the technique that Luo Fan had created, the primal core mastery was a major realm, and there was no definite dividing line in the middle. There is no such thing as breaking through one small realm after another before finally breaking through to the primal core mastery. In reality, if one's aptitude was exceptional, it was normal for one to break through to Dan formation at the moment of Dan formation after gaining a bit of enlightenment. However, if one had to categorize them, one could use the state of the primal core to categorize them into 3 realms: initial success, great success, and perfection. From the side, Luo Fan was able to clearly see every single one of Lin Tiannan's thoughts. Before Lin Tiannan broke through, he already knew that Lin Tiannan's martial arts realm would increase greatly. However, when Lin Tiannan really broke through and finally broke into a new realm, he was still incomparably surprised. Not bad, not bad. To be able to see through this, you are worthy of being my disciple, Luo Fan praised. At this time, the true chi in Lin Tiannan's body surged. His body emitted a crackling sound. Wisps of great, true chi were sucked in and out of his acupoints. Countless tiny impurities were expelled from his body. Along with this change, his body became even rounder and more durable. He was several times stronger than he was a few breaths ago. While Luo Fan was speaking, the change in true chi had already calmed down. Lin Tiannan also truly heard Luo Fan's words. His heart was filled with satisfaction. He bowed to Luo Fan and thanked him. "Thank you for your praise, Master." Luo Fan smiled and said, "Since you have seen through it, go back to your world and take a look." At this time, Lin Tiannan's expression was no longer fluctuating. He didn't seem excited, nor did he seem nervous. It was as if he was returning to his hometown that he had just left. He bowed and said, "Yes." As he said this, he stood up and stepped into the door. Luo Fan smiled. He didn't make any movements. With one step, he followed Lin Tiannan into the door. The limitless Void Palace was Luo Fan's magic treasure, so he naturally had absolute control over it. It was extremely simple for him to project a portal somewhere in the minor Kiliacosm to this great desolate world. The moment Lin Tian Nan stepped into the door, he felt a familiar yet strange aura. Then the light around him changed. His body seemed to have passed through a layer of water. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived at the top of a tall mountain somewhere in the mainland. A sea of clouds lingered around him, making him look like a fairy. "This is my hometown." Lin Tian Nan looked around. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. This entire world, this entire heaven and earth, was completely different from when he left. The endless stars in the sky, the silver moon hanging high in the sky, the land that had expanded a lot, and the things that were moving on the land that he had never seen before were all different from the hometown that he knew. However, he clearly knew that this was his hometown. This was the hometown that he had dreamed of for thousands of years, the hometown that he had always dreamed of returning to. It is now the third generation of civilization. From the time you left until now, this world has already experienced 2 generations of civilization. One is the high martial civilization that you came from, and the other is the cultivation civilization. Now, it is a cultivation civilization that is both high martial and cultivation. Luo Fan appeared beside Lin Tian Nan and said calmly, "This infinite void world was in the infinite void palace. It could be said that it was a part of him. If he wanted to understand the evolution of civilization, he only needed to think about it. The moment he entered the minor Kiliacosm again, his mind slightly moved, and everything that had happened in the minor Kiliacosm in the past 800,000 years instantly flowed into his mind, allowing him to instantly understand the evolution process of this world civilization. As he understood the evolution of civilization in this infinite void world, he couldn't help but secretly exclaim in admiration. After Lin Tian Nan broke the void and left this infinite void world for a long time, because no martial artist was able to comprehend the mysteries of space and transcend, the number of martial artists who believed that cultivating martial arts could transcend became fewer and fewer. After tens of thousands of years, there was no longer any martial artist who believed in this point. Things changed about 200,000 years after Lin Tian Nan left. At that time, in the southern part of the continent, there was a fierce tiger in the deep mountains who was coincidentally enlightened. Its spiritual consciousness took shape, and the fierce beast transformed into a demon. Finally, it comprehended the first cultivation method in this infinite void world and obtained a great magical power. When it cultivated to a high level, it could fly in the sky, burrow into the earth, move mountains, and drain the seas. It was almost omnipotent. The highest level of cultivation was only the 9th level of the transcendent realm, and they were still greatly limited by their physical bodies. As the tiger became famous, the creatures on the continent discovered that there was another, seemingly more powerful cultivation method. They saw the hope of transcending, and they all sought cultivation methods from the fierce tiger. It was unknown whether the fierce tiger was a true, noble person, or whether it wanted people to step on this unknown path of cultivation with it. However, it didn't refuse, and all requests were granted. It didn't hold back, and it spread the cultivation methods, allowing countless humans, beasts, and spiritual plants to step on the path of cultivation. It was almost single-handedly, and this cultivation method spread throughout the world. In the end, it was called the true ancestor by later generations. In the following thousands of years, countless talented and brilliant people poured all their energy into perfecting the way of cultivation. They created way of cultivation, which was like a vast sea of stars. Gradually, the way of cultivation surpassed the way of martial arts. After another thousands of years, when the last group of warriors died, the high martial arts civilization that Lin Tian Nan was familiar with was officially replaced by the cultivation civilization. However, although the cultivation method allowed one to cultivate more power than a warrior and obtain a longer lifespan, it seemed to be much higher than the martial arts. But in essence, it was not much better than the martial arts in terms of transcending life. In the end, during the 300,000 years when the cultivation civilization prevailed, although there were countless legends of becoming immortals and Buddhas, not a single cultivator was able to truly break through the limits of the world and transcend. Finally, this caused the creatures of this world to gradually lose hope in the transcendence of the cultivation method. Poverty leads to change, and change leads to success. 200,000 years ago, there was a cultivator who obtained a cultivation method left behind by a warrior of the transcendent realm hundreds of thousands of years ago. He was shocked by the concise and direct description of the transcendence. He made a great decision to abandon the cultivation method that he had practiced for hundreds of years and switched to this martial art. In the end, he spent hundreds of years and finally cultivated this martial art to the 9th level of the transcendent realm, attaining a realm no lower than the peak of the cultivation realm. Moreover, because he was once a cultivator, he combined the methods of the cultivation method to create countless spells and techniques that were used by warriors of the transcendent realm. When a warrior reached the transcendent realm, his abilities were not inferior to that of a cultivator. Because of the strength of his body, he was even stronger than a cultivator of the same level. After that, he successfully left the mountain and defeated thousands of sects on the continent, becoming invincible. However, he once again let the countless creatures on the continent see the power of martial arts and cultivation methods. Only then did they realize that there was actually a cultivation method in the world that could allow one to cultivate so quickly. At the same time, it also gave endless hope to the cultivators who seemed to have reached the end of the cultivation path, and they devoted their endless energy to the exploration of the cultivation method. The cultivation method reappeared. Because of the supplement of the cultivation method became more prosperous than the last time when the civilization of the high martial arts was in the high martial arts. This achievement also made the cultivator who was the first to practice martial arts respectfully known as the martial ancestor. After that, the development center of the civilization kept changing. Sometimes it was martial arts, and sometimes it was cultivation. Both had their advantages and disadvantages, and neither could suppress the other. Gradually, the wonderful civilization where martial arts and cultivation coexisted gradually came into being. Until now, more than 300,000 years had passed. As Luo Fan casually pointed out, he explained the various changes that had happened in this small world in the past 870,000 years. Hearing such earth-shattering changes, Lin Tiannan's eyes were filled with shock. A feeling of the vicissitudes of the world and the countless changes of the world appeared in his heart. I didn't expect it to be like this for hundreds of thousands of years. No one had broken through the void. If I hadn't met Master, I'm afraid I would have become a pile of dirt by now. Thinking of this, Lin Tiannan's heart surged with an indescribable sense of gratitude. As Luo Fan spoke, he suddenly realized that Lin Tiannan's expression was emotional and his eyes were filled with gratitude. He couldn't help but be slightly stunned. After thinking for a while, he understood Lin Tiannan's thoughts. He couldn't help but smile and said, "I can give you 10 years of time. You can go around this world in this period of time. After 10 years, I will come back to bring you back to the ancient world." "Thank you, Master." Lin Tiannan bowed and thanked him. Luo Fan faintly smiled. He raised his hand and gently waved it. In the blink of an eye, he and Lin Tiannan arrived at a mountain peak that was thousands of feet away from a city. Chapter 187. Setting the limit of space and seeking the law in the South. Luo Fan did not continue to stay in the small Kiliacosm within the Wuji Palace. His body shook, and he directly returned to the chaotic world, back to the center of the 100,000 feet high mountain. When he appeared halfway up the mountain, he discovered that Lin Tiannan's yellow turban warrior was running around like a headless fly. Luo Fan's heart moved. He already knew that it was because of the separation between the two worlds that it had lost contact with Lin Tiannan. That was why it was acting like this. He was too lazy to bother with this magic tool that had no self. He raised his hand, and a black whirlpool appeared in the void. It rotated violently, and suddenly swallowed the yellow turban warrior. After another rotation, the black whirlpool disappeared. At this time, the yellow turban warrior had already been transferred to the small kiliocosm within the Wuji Palace. It turned into a ray of light and quickly flew towards where Lin Tian Nan was. In a flash, it had already entered Lin Tian Nan's body and disappeared without a trace. Lin Tian Nan was currently at the top of the 1,000-feet high mountain, thinking about how he should enjoy these 10 years. Suddenly, he felt a ray of light flash by and rush into the Naiwan Palace between his eyebrows. In an instant, he felt the incomparably familiar old Huang merge with him. He couldn't help but be surprised, and then he suddenly understood. Lin Tian Nan could already recall the yellow turban warrior back into his body when he had refined it to a certain degree, but he had never done so before. After all, for the past 1,000 years, the yellow turban warrior had been serving him. His clothing, food, shelter, and transportation were all prepared by the yellow turban warrior. Without the yellow turban warrior, it was impossible for him to cultivate seriously. Under these circumstances, how could he merge the yellow turban warrior into his body? At this time, under Luo Fan's divine power, the yellow turban warrior merged into his body for the first time. It instantly gave him an extremely novel feeling. It was as if there was an extra soul in his body, an extra body in his body, and a sense of fullness appeared in his mind. Old Huang, Lin Tian Nan asked softly. Yes, the yellow turban warrior replied. Can you still think right now? Lin Tian Nan muttered. Serene South, I can still think right now. The yellow scarf warrior's faint voice rang out. That's great. I'm relieved that you can still think. I never thought that fusing you into my body would feel so good. If I had known earlier, I would have tried a long time ago. Lin Tian then exclaimed in admiration. This feeling is very ordinary, Serene South. The voice of the yellow scarf warrior came again. There was almost no fluctuation in its voice, as if it had no emotions. Is that so? As long as you don't feel any discomfort, that's good. Lin Tian Nan laughed out loud but didn't care. He immediately began to circulate the true energy within his body. As the true energy circulated, a force naturally appeared in the air, carrying his body toward the huge city in front of him. 10 years was not a very long period of time. Lin Tian Nan needed to make the best use of his time in order to understand the situation of this much larger continent. However, it was not a good time to waste. After more than 800,000 years, even the civilization had changed by 3 generations. Now, other than the familiar fluctuation of vitality in the air, there was nothing similar to Lin Tian Nan's era. At this time, Lin Tian Nan's cultivation had reached the second stage of fate-changing. Flying the sky and moving mountains and seas was no longer a problem for him. Especially in this minor thousand world, the stability of the space was far less than that of the Great Wasteland. In a situation where the density of various substances was far from enough, his various magical powers and powers could be fully displayed. This made it extremely easy for him to fly in the air. At this time, his figure looked like an immortal descending to the mortal world. In the blink of an eye, he had already flown a few miles and arrived at a height of 10,000 feet above the city. Seeing the bustling crowd below, Lin Tian Nan knew that it would be troublesome if he continued like this. With a slight thought, the light around his body distorted and his figure disappeared without a trace. He had used a few small techniques that he had learned over the years to hide his figure in the air. After his figure disappeared, he landed in the city below. In this way, although there were many warriors and cultivators in the city, no one could discover his figure. They did not know that a creature that had transcended the world had returned. Luo Fan stood in the great wasteland and fell into deep thought. Within the minor thousand world, not a single warrior was able to break through to the 9th stage of the transcendent realm and successfully break through the void. This was beyond his expectations. In these hundreds of thousands of years, how many creatures had cultivated the way of martial arts and the way of cultivation? They were as numerous as the grains of sand in the Ganges River. Under these circumstances, How could he have imagined that such a situation would occur? Of course, perhaps he had already faintly sensed it in the depths of his heart, but he did not pay attention to it before. Only now, when he was explaining to Lin Tian Nan, did he have to face this situation. The aptitude of the people I created should not be bad. At the very least, they should be much stronger than the ordinary people on Earth in the future. The minor thousand world is full of vitality, and the environment is incomparably superior. Why are they unable to comprehend the mysteries of space and break through the void? Luo Fan thought to himself. 10 years, that was the time of the minor thousand world. Compared to the great wasteland, it was only 10 days. Luo Fan did not want to take advantage of this time to do anything. He only planned to stand here and wait for Lin Tian Nan to explore the minor thousand world while thinking about how to solve the problem of the minor thousand world. It did not make sense that there was a problem with the cultivation method. In these hundreds of thousands of years, there should have been people who had comprehended a cultivation method above the ninth stage of the transcendent realm. But why was no one able to comprehend the mysteries of space? This made Luo Fan very confused. With a slight thought, the cultivation system inside the minor thousand world appeared in his mind. Drawing it into the body, refining qi into spirit, refining the spirit to return to the void, refining the void into the way. These are the minor thousand worlds cultivation 4 great realms. Among them, each great realm was divided into 4 small realms: initial success, small success, large success, and perfection. There were a total of 16 small realms. If a cultivator cultivated to the void refinement and perfection realm, it was equivalent to the 9th stage of the transcendent realm that Luo Fan had created in the martial cultivation realms. In terms of true realms, cultivation did not seem to have much of an advantage. However, if a cultivator cultivated to the void refinement and perfection realm, an ordinary person could live for as long as 15,000 years. This was something that a martial artist could not compare to. An ordinary martial artist, even if he broke through to the 9th stage of the transcendent realm at the peak of his life, could at most live for 10,000 years. If he broke through when his life was declining, then the number of years he could live would be even shorter. He might not even live for 1 or 2,000 years. From his point of view, the advantage of cultivation was too great. In addition, as long as a cultivator cultivated to the divine transformation realm, he could condense his spirit and form a kind of primordial spirit that was so fragile that it could hardly withstand the wind. It was just a variant of the primordial spirit. It was countless times worse than the worst of the hundreds of primordial spirit methods that Luo Fan had created. The only similarity was the name. After that, the cultivator's ability to control all kinds of primordial qi in heaven and earth would increase dramatically. He could use the power of heaven and earth to obtain all kinds of magic power. This made the cultivator who cultivated to this realm have attack power and survival ability far superior to the martial artists of the same realm. This made the cultivator's advantage seem even greater. It was precisely because of this that when the cultivator appeared hundreds of thousands of years ago, it quickly replaced the advanced martial art civilization. However, because the void refinement and perfection realm were only equivalent to the 9th stage of the transcendent realm for martial artists, because of the limitation of the realm, the limitation of the aptitude, or some kind of strange restriction, they could not understand the mystery of space at all, let alone fly to the untainted land. From this point of view, the way of martial arts and the way of cultivation were the same. It cannot be said that one was superior to the other. Luo Fan's mind began to move. Countless information flowed through his mind. This information constantly condensed, constantly twisted, and constantly reorganized. In the end, it turned into hundreds of guesses about the minor kiliacosm. As his mind entered the minor kiliacosm, Luo Fan quietly comprehended the rules of operation of the minor kiliacosm. He comprehended the essence of life of the billions of creatures in the minor kiliacosm. He comprehended what kind of mysterious power restricted these creatures from comprehending the mysteries of space in a minor kiliacosm. He searched for the correct one out of the hundreds of guesses that he had thought of. Time slowly passed. When Luo Fan finally confirmed 3 of the most likely guesses, it was already the 10th day. It was already time to take Lin Tian Nan away. The rules of space reject the thoughts of living creatures. Living creatures instinctively reject the rules of space. The untainted land has a strong restriction on the creatures of the minor kiliocosm. Only these 3 methods are the most likely. Luo Fan thought to himself. He raised his hand and waved. Lin Tian Nan, who had been quietly waiting for Luo Fan at the top of the mountain, shook his body. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the minor kiliocosm. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Luo Fan. After 10 years of traveling, Lin Tian Nan had a deep understanding of the minor kiliocosm. At the same time, he felt sympathy for his juniors in the minor kiliocosm. Because they could not find the possibility of transcending, the cultivation world in the minor kiliocosm was filled with a kind of confusion and despair. This kind of confusion and despair caused the cultivation world in the minor kiliocosm to become lifeless. The creation of cultivation methods and the modification of cultivation methods had stopped at some point. At this time, the entire cultivation world had not had any new cultivation methods or new techniques for tens of thousands of years. Even new magical tools had not been invented. If this continued, it could be predicted that this civilization of martial arts and cultivation had reached its end. As long as there was a slight change, or even the creation of a new cultivation method, the entire civilization could collapse in an instant. At that time, there would be a storm of blood. The replacement of a civilization was not that simple, and conflicts were unavoidable. Don't think that the transformation of a high martial civilization into a cultivation civilization was easy to summarize in one sentence. But in reality, the blood that flowed during the evolution of the civilization was enough to spill over the entire continent. Chapter 188. To establish a heavenly tribulation. The wonderful art of spiritual perception. Luo Fan's expression did not change in the slightest, but he was rather unhappy in his heart. He had already passed down the method of transcendence. Wasn't the heavenly martial divine chapter the method of transcendence? If that's the case, how could you break the void and come to this primordial world? However, he knew that this was because Lin Tian Nan was too worried and confused, so he didn't want to argue with him. Thus, he said, I have my own plans regarding this matter. Master, please be merciful. Lin Tian Nan was still not satisfied and continued to beg, unwilling to get up. Luo Fan looked at Lin Tian Nan's expression and couldn't help but laugh. Why was it that the more he lived, the more he regressed? Why was he so calculative with his own disciple? After making up his mind, he shook his head and lifted Lin Tian Nan up, saying, I already know about this matter. I will naturally give them a chance to escape. However, have you ever thought about what it would be like if they were allowed to transcend and come to this primordial world? I've never thought about it. Master, please give me some pointers. Since Luo Fan didn't want him to kneel, Lin Tian Nan couldn't continue kneeling. He could only stand up and ask in confusion. You stayed in the spirit space for 10 years. Only 5 days have passed in the primordial world. Luo Fan didn't explain it too clearly. He only pointed out the key points, but Lin Tian Nan already completely understood Luo Fan's meaning. 2 years in the minor kiliocosm was equivalent to 1 day in the primordial world. Then 1 month in the primordial world was equivalent to 60 years in the minor kiliocosm. If only one cultivator or one warrior could transcend from the spirit space every 60 years among the billions of creatures in the spirit space. This was just a conservative estimate. Then one creature would transcend from the spirit space and enter the untainted land every month. If this continued, in just 10,000 years, there would be hundreds of thousands of people. Over 1 million people in a single Yuan Hui. In addition, these transcendent beings would continue to reproduce. After tens of thousands of years, the number of weak creatures coming out of the minor kiliocosm, compared to the untainted world, would increase to an unimaginable level. It was a huge burden on Luo Fan. Thinking of this, Lin Tian Nen broke out in a cold sweat. The primordial world was not a paradise. Lin Tian Nan, who had traveled the great desolate land for over 100 years, understood this even better than Luo Fan. Although he was already at the life-changing realm when he left the valley, if it wasn't for the yellow scarf warrior protecting him, he would have died hundreds of times over. These dangers did not necessarily come from encountering beings more powerful than him. These dangers could come from any situation, from all kinds of characteristics, to all kinds of mountains and rivers, to all kinds of wind and evil spirits, and even the occasional surge of strange yuan qi. All of them could pose a threat to his fragile life. Furthermore, as he walked, he could faintly sense a terrifying aura being nurtured in some places. Although he did not know what those auras represented, he knew that an existence with such a powerful aura could crush him to death with just a finger or a claw. In this kind of environment, if the warriors and cultivators from the minor Kiliacosm were to enter this world, what awaited them was not transcendence, but a hellish life. Furthermore, if the warriors and cultivators died in the minor Kiliacosm, as long as their souls did not scatter, they would have a chance to reincarnate. If they died in the primordial world, there would be nothing left. After thinking about this situation clearly, Lin Tian Nan could not help but fall into a dilemma. He wanted them to transcend, but he was afraid that doing so would harm them. After a while, Lin Tian Nan's mental struggle ended. He made up his mind and said, "This disciple is willing to do everything in his power to lead them to survive in this primordial world. I beg Master to grant me this." Hearing this, Luo Fan's expression did not change. He only nodded his head. He was very satisfied with Lin Tian Nan's decision. During the time that Lin Tian Nan was struggling with his thoughts, he had already figured out how to help the warriors and cultivators in the minor Kiliacosm comprehend the mysteries of space and escape from the minor Kiliacosm. In fact, it was very simple. He only needed a mechanism that he could not be more familiar with to break through this restriction. It did not matter which of the three reasons the creatures were unable to comprehend the mysteries of space. This mechanism was the heavenly tribulation. He only needed to set up the heavenly tribulation and borrow the power of the heavenly tribulation to attack the warriors and cultivators who were unable to comprehend the mysteries of space. Finally, in the most dangerous situation of life and death, the heavenly tribulation would reveal the mysteries of space. This would reduce the difficulty of comprehension by 1,000 times to the point where it was enough for the person undergoing the heavenly tribulation to comprehend it. If he did this, many peak cultivators would be able to comprehend the mysteries of space and escape. Since he had already found a reason, Luo Fan was naturally not in a hurry. What he needed to do now was to choose a relatively safe place to allow the person who had transcended to survive in the primordial world. With a thought, he raised his hand, and a pure white cloud 10 feet wide appeared out of thin air. It lifted him and Lin Tian Nan up and quickly flew upwards. In the blink of an eye, the two of them were already thousands of miles high in the sky. The primordial world is truly dangerous. Wait for me to choose a safe place for you to settle down," Luo Fan said with a slight smile. When Lin Tian Nan heard this, how could he not understand that his master had already agreed to his request? He was overjoyed and was about to kowtow again. Luo Fan was already prepared. With a thought, a force held him back, preventing him from kowtowing. He then said, "Don't be overly courteous." With a thought, the cloud flew towards the southeast. Although this place was hundreds of millions of miles away from Buzhou Mountain, it was still very close to the northwest. Comparatively speaking, the southwest was much more spacious. If they wanted to find a safe place, they would have to go to the northwest. Although Lin Tian Nan could already fly, this was the first time he had flown thousands of miles high in the sky on a cloud. Thus, he felt that it was quite novel. Standing on the cloud, he excitedly observed the ever-changing scenery of the mountains and rivers. After a while, he suddenly had a thought. With a wave of his hand, a mysterious light was emitted from his hand. It landed beside him and transformed into a yellow scarf warrior. He had released his own magic tool, the Yellow Scarf Warrior. Seeing Lin Tiannan's actions, Luo Fan knew that he had already treated the Yellow Scarf Warrior as a real creature and as a friend. Although he did not agree, he did not want to change his mind. He was only Lin Tiannan's master. Teaching him cultivation techniques and guiding him to increase his cultivation was his duty. No matter how much he valued him, the most he could do was teach him how to conduct himself. As for Lin Tiannan's inner thoughts, they were not something he could care about, and he did not want to care about. The chaos world was so vast. If he flew around like a headless fly, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. It was certain that he would succeed, but it would take too much time. Thus, after watching for a while, Luo Fan decided to change his method. The mantra of the yin-yang method suddenly flowed through his mind. At the same time, his right hand quickly moved. He wanted to use this method to calculate the approximate distance and direction of a location that he wanted, calculating which location was safer and more suitable. Compared to calculating the future and calculating the mysteries of heaven, this method was much simpler and faster. It even consumed less mental energy. In just a few breaths of time, images flashed through Luo Fan's mind in a second, and he had already calculated the direction of the suitable location as well as the approximate distance from where he was. Southeast, about 7 billion miles. That's a bit far. Luo Fan understood. With a slight movement of his mind, the pure white cloud changed direction and rushed in the direction that he had calculated. Its speed became faster and faster. In the end, it was not much slower than the rainbow that he had transformed into, because he had diverted some of his attention to control the cloud. Even though it was extremely fast, it didn't feel like it was moving too fast. At least Lin Tiannan could still see the details of the scenery below from above the cloud. It didn't have the phenomenon of the scenery turning into afterimages when the cloud was moving too fast. However, although the scenery below was majestic and beautiful, Lin Tiannan's expression gradually lost its initial joy and enjoyment. Instead, it became serious and dignified. This was because under the path that the cloud took, there was a strong aura surging below. It was as if it could suddenly explode at any time and crush him into pieces. This kind of feeling, to Lin Tiannan, was a little too stimulating. If he could still watch with interest in this kind of situation, then his nerves were too thick. Luo Fan naturally did not care about how serious Lin Tiannan's heart was. As he controlled the cloud, his mind turned. He carefully observed the various rules of the small kiliacosm and thought about how to set up the heavenly tribulation. To him, setting up a heavenly tribulation mechanism in the world that he had created was naturally not a difficult task. However, how to grasp the degree of control, how to trigger it, how to set it up, how to make it easier for them to comprehend the mysteries of space and transcend, and how to ensure the strength of the heavenly tribulation, all of this required a lot of thought. Many techniques related to the formation of the small kiliacosm flowed through Luo Fan's mind. Because his realm had increased, when he comprehended these techniques again, Luo Fan discovered many mysteries that he had never discovered before. He found the roots of many techniques that he had never understood before. He felt that his harvest was not small. He even felt that even if he could not comprehend what he wanted, as long as he had these gains, it would be enough to make up for all his hard work. This flight took 7 days and 7 nights. Although 7 billion miles was a very short distance to the great wilderness, compared to the speed of Luo Fan's cloud flight, it was not a short distance. To be able to cross this distance in 7 days and 7 nights, Luo Fan's cloud flight speed was already quite shocking. Chapter 189, Wondrous Law Thunder Spirit, set up protection. The mysteriousness of the divine firmament heavenly thunder spirit technique was not in its power. In fact, the power of this thunder spirit technique was only average. What made this thunder spirit technique surpass normal thunder spirit techniques was that it could condense a thunder spirit in the void of the minor kiliacosm. It could control all the lightning and heavenly tribulations in the minor kiliacosm like a supercomputer. It could adjust the strength of each heavenly tribulation and change the way it was triggered. Moreover, It could control millions of heavenly tribulations at the same time without any possibility of not being able to handle it. After circulating this mysterious thunder technique that he had created by combining the mysteries of the spirit space several times in his mind, Luo Fan came back to his senses and paid attention to the safe position that he had calculated using the yin-yang test method. As for integrating the thunder spirit technique into the minor kiliacosm, he had to wait until the transcendent realm cultivators had a foothold before he could do it. Floating thousands of miles above the ground, Luo Fan looked down. He discovered that below him was an extremely large lake. This lake was irregular in shape. Looking at its diameter, it was at least 130 million miles wide. It was like a boundless ocean. In this sea-like lake, there were 287 islands. They were like stars in the sky, decorating this sea-like lake very beautifully. Among these islands, there was a huge island with a radius of more than 3 million miles. It was very close to the center of the lake. Even though they were thousands of miles above the ground, this huge lake seemed boundless. They couldn't see the end of it. Lin Tian had long been stunned. He had never seen such a magnificent scene before. The entire continent of the minor kiliacosm was only 20 million miles wide. It was more than enough to fit into this lake. How could he remain calm when he suddenly saw such a lake with a radius of 130 million miles? What Luo Fan saw was naturally much more than what Lin Tianan saw. However, it was only on the surface. If he wanted to make this place into a perfect safe space, the information he could see was far from enough. Thinking about this, his mind moved. The black fog that locked the great sun golden eyes and bright moon's silver eyes slowly dissipated. Golden and silver light flashed in his eyes. He had already clearly seen the entire lake and the 287 islands that adorned it. Countless pieces of information flowed into his mind through his eyes, which had been locked for a long time. They were constantly collapsing and being reorganized. In the blink of an eye, he had already understood everything about this lake. With a thought, the cloud that was carrying the two of them suddenly descended. In the blink of an eye, they had already landed on the island at the center of the lake, and they were standing on top of a tall mountain near the northwest of the island. Standing there and looking around, Lin Tian felt as if he had entered another world. Looking at the vast and desolate continent and the boundless blue waves in the distance, Lin Tian felt as if he had entered another world. He felt a sense of superiority. At the same time, he felt as if he was the only one in the world. On this island, there was an incomparably dense source of chaotic energy. On this source of chaotic energy, there was a turtle-shaped innate god that had already taken form. However, its spiritual aperture had not been opened yet. It was still muddle-headed. His current location was dozens of kilometers below the mountain they were standing on. Apart from this, on the remaining 286 islands in this lake, there were 126 islands that were dangerous. On these islands, there were either innate gods being nurtured or natural treasures evolving. "Master, have we reached the ocean?" Lin Tian asked carefully. When Luo Fan heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. Of course not. This place is still billions and billions of miles away from the real ocean. This place looks vast, but it is just an ordinary lake in the wilderness. So that's how it is. But why does this place look so much like the legendary Celestial Mountain? Moreover, it is surrounded by endless seawater. Lin Tian said in shock. This is not strange. The wilderness is so vast. It is not strange for there to be such a large lake. Do you think this place would be a good place for warriors and cultivators to live after entering the wilderness? Luo Fan laughed. It is not just good, it is too good. Thank you, Master, for your concern. Lin Tian then expressed his gratitude. Luo Fan waved his hand. With a thought, a mysterious light was emitted from his body. It suddenly wrapped around Lin Tianan. Then it suddenly sank down. It was as if it had sunk to the bottom of the water. It brought the two of them into the rocks below. It rushed downwards at an extremely fast speed. Earth escape. Looking at the situation, Lin Tianan instantly knew what state he was in. Although this was not the first time he had tried it, It was the first time he had encountered such a fast and easy earth escape. At this moment, he did not panic. Instead, he looked around curiously. He did not know where his master was taking him to, but he knew that his master must have a reason for his actions. However, he did not waste any time thinking about it. After a dozen breaths, Lin Tian then suddenly felt his surroundings become empty. He had already appeared in a huge space filled with grayish primal chaos yuan qi. And in this grayish primal chaos yuan qi, there was a huge creature faintly discernible. Ong! As if it knew that someone had arrived, the huge creature suddenly let out a loud roar. The sound was loud and clear, like the roar of a dragon. Even the grayish primal chaos yuan qi in the entire space surged with this loud roar, like a drop of water falling into a calm pot of boiling oil. This huge creature was naturally the tortoise-shaped innate god. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The grayish primal chaos yuan qi moved and condensed. In front of them, a staircase formed by the primal chaos yuan qi appeared. It led to the location of the innate god. At this point, Lin Tian Nan could see the true appearance of the innate god. It was a huge tortoise with a circumference of 100 miles. At this moment, the tortoise was twisting its short head. It was confused, ignorant, but full of vigilance, staring at the two of them. Luo Fan took a step forward and led Lin Tian Nan on the stairs formed by the primal chaos yuan qi. It seemed slow, but was actually fast. After a short while, they had already arrived in front of the tortoise's head. As he passed, the grayish primal chaos yuan qi shook and shrank, filling up the long staircase that Luo Fan had previously opened up. Ong, the huge tortoise-shaped innate god, shrank its head slightly and let out another dragon roar. Although it was muddle-headed, as an innate god, its instincts were not weak. It could faintly feel the strength of the existence in front of it. Its heart was filled with vigilance and fear. Master, what kind of monster is this? Why is it so powerful? Lin Tian Nan asked in the manner of a good student. Luo Fan smiled and explained, this is an innate god that evolved naturally in the untainted land. It is very powerful. When it was born, it had the power equivalent to the 9th realm of fate changing. Because of its great birth, even if you were in the 9th realm of heaven martial arts, you might not be able to defeat it when it was just born. I see. Hearing this, Lin Tian Nen couldn't help but feel scared and envious. He was scared because the aura he had encountered back then must have been this kind of innate god. Fortunately, he was cautious and didn't disturb it. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. He was envious because the innate god's birth was so high. It was actually so powerful when it was born. Do you have a name? Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and through some mysterious connection, his own mind connected with the innate god's mind. Tuain, the turtle-shaped innate god, thought for a long time before giving such a name. Seeing this, hope rose in Luo Fan's heart. He asked a few more questions in detail, but the answer he received made him quite disappointed. This innate god only knew this one word. No matter what Luo Fan asked, it only replied with the word tu. There was no other answer. Knowing that knowing its own name was the limit of this innate god. Although Luo Fan was unwilling, he could not ask any more questions. Lifting his hand, a light instantly rushed out of his hand and entered the head of the turtle-shaped innate god. With a spin and a shake, it turned into a large piece of memory that contained countless words and pictures. In the blink of an eye, it had already integrated into the consciousness of the turtle-shaped innate god. This is a basic cultivation method. It can shorten the time it takes for you to awaken by 1 yuan wei. If you owe me a favor, you can protect the living creatures on this island until they have the power to protect themselves. At the same time, Luo Fan engraved a bit of his mind into the consciousness of the turtle-shaped innate god. The turtle-shaped innate god was slightly stunned, as if it could not understand such a complicated thought. However, it still nodded instinctively. Luo Fan knew that this was the display of the simple nature of this innate god's life. He knew that there would be no more twists and turns in this matter. In the future, if this innate god understood the thought that he left behind, it would naturally obey. Moreover, even if it did not obey, Luo Fan had countless ways to deal with it, so there was no need to worry. Therefore, he smiled slightly and raised his hand to beckon Lin Tian-Nan. With a shake of his body, he brought Lin Tian-Nan with him and turned into a ray of light. In the blink of an eye, they had crossed a distance of hundreds of miles and returned to the top of the mountain. Just now, Luo Fan had left behind the basic cultivation method and left his thought. However, it was only in the space of finger. How could Lin Tian-Nan see it clearly? Now that they had returned to the top of the mountain, he could not help but be slightly surprised. He asked, "Master, this innate god is below. Won't it be dangerous for warriors and cultivators to live above? I have already made arrangements. This innate god will not bring you any trouble. Instead, it will protect you." Luo Fan smiled. As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved it lightly. Countless three-dimensional shadows of talismans flashed past and flowed through the area of 500 kilometers around the mountain. As the light flashed, the ground within a 500-kilometer radius changed slightly. Origin Chi could enter and exit the ground, but it was difficult for external objects to invade it. Chapter 190. Divine Claw Transformation Pattern. After Luo Fan finished all of this, he turned to Lin Tian-Nan and said, "I will set up a large formation to seal off the lake. You can observe it for a while, and perhaps you will be able to benefit from it." When Lin Tian-Nan heard this, he was overjoyed and said, "Disciple will definitely do his best to observe it. Don't worry, master." Luo Fan nodded, raised his hand, and lightly waved. A white cloud with a radius of 10 feet appeared out of thin air under their feet, lifted them up, and flew straight into the sky. The speed of this cloud was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had already brought them thousands of miles into the sky. With the experience of looking at the lake from the island, Lin Tian-Nan couldn't help but have a feeling that he didn't have at the beginning. He felt that the lake below was like a crystal plate decorated with hundreds of jades, showing a special kind of charm. Luo Fan arrived thousands of miles into the sky. With a slight movement of his mind, the information about the lake that he had previously seen through the golden eyes of the great sun and the silver eyes of the bright moon reappeared in his mind. It constantly circulated and reorganized itself. In the end, it formed a grand formation. After this formation was formed in his mind, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and waved it in the air. Mysterious and unpredictable trajectories appeared, as if he was evolving the laws of heaven and earth. As he moved, the innate chi in the air gathered towards his hands. The innate chi continued to condense as his hands moved in a mysterious trajectory, eventually turning into strands of energy threads. These energy strands were as thin as silk and continuously gathered around Luo Fan's body. They were like living creatures that constantly twisted, spiraled, and tangled together. As time passed, these energy strands gradually covered 100,000 feet area around Luo Fan and Lin Tian-Nan. Within this 100,000 feet area, the energy strands reflected a very mysterious rainbow under the sunlight. It was incomparably beautiful and enchanting. The space within 100,000 feet area was illuminated like a mysterious and unfathomable illusory void. Luo Fan's actions lasted for half a day. It wasn't because this formation was very mysterious, but because this formation needed to cover a very large area. 130 million feet area of the lake was far beyond the range of his senses. Even though his cultivation had broken through to the golden immortal realm and he borrowed the help of the limitless void palace to increase his senses, he could only sense less than 1,000,000 feet area. After half a day, Luo Fan had roughly completed the formation. At this moment, the energy threads that had gathered around him were so dense that they filled the surrounding area. Every inch of space within the area was filled with thousands of energy threads. There was practically no space left in the entire space. During this process, Lin Tian-Nan had already entered a state of no man and no self. His eyes could only see the mysterious tracks that Luo Fan had drawn. His hands unconsciously followed Luo Fan's movements and slightly moved. He had already entered the deepest state of comprehension. Luo Fan's heart was like still water. Countless information flowed through his mind. His hands were as steady as a rock. Every single movement of his was calculated and controlled with the most precise precision. It contained the mysteries of the formation that he had just comprehended. It was so mysterious that it was hard to describe. After half a day, Luo Fan finally outlined the last movement. Gold and silver light flashed in his eyes. The entire formation seemed to have frozen in place. Then, under the influence of a mysterious force, it suddenly sank downwards. In the process, it constantly absorbed the inexhaustible Xiantian Yuan Qi in the surroundings to strengthen itself. As a result, the formation did not shrink as it sank. Instead, the deeper it sank, the larger it became. In the blink of an eye, it had already traveled 1,000 miles and arrived above the huge lake below. At this time, the size of the formation had already expanded to a radius of 130 million miles. It just happened to completely cover the entire lake. Bang! The formation came into contact with the lake and produced a strange sound. Even though it was 1,000 miles away, it still seemed extremely loud. It directly rushed into Luo Fan and Lin Tian Nan's eardrums. Luo Fan was fine. He already knew that there would be such a sound. He was not surprised, and his mind did not waver in the slightest. However, Lin Tian Nan was not prepared at all. In an instant, he received this strange sound. He only felt that his entire mind, his entire soul, was only left with this extremely strange sound that seemed to contain endless mysteries. Following this sound, it was as if he was stimulated by some kind of mysterious force. In this half a day of comprehension, the countless mysterious tracks that Luo Fan had drawn instantly produced a mysterious and unpredictable change. Following this change, a martial art that contained palm techniques, fist techniques, body techniques, claw techniques, finger techniques, and other techniques appeared in his mind. Once this martial art appeared, Lin Tian Nan instantly felt that his martial arts realm had increased by a level. He even felt that he had completely mastered this martial art and could use it as he pleased. An indescribable joy instantly filled Lin Tian Nan's mind. It made him feel that everything between heaven and earth was so wonderful. At the same time, he felt an indescribable gratitude towards Luo Fan. He felt that acknowledging this person as his master was the wisest decision he had ever made in his life. Just as Lin Tian Nan was comprehending the martial art, the energy threads that Luo Fan had drawn had already caused the entire lake to undergo a strange change. As these energy threads entered the lake, a faint gray fog gradually appeared on the surface of the lake. This gray fog accumulated and gradually covered the entire incomparably huge lake. Seeing this, Luo Fan's face revealed a satisfied expression. He turned his head towards Lin Tian Nan and asked, "Did you comprehend anything? Disciple is not talented, but I was able to comprehend a martial art from Master's movements. It's just that I don't know if there are any mistakes. Master, please enlighten me." Lin Tian Nan hurriedly bowed as he spoke. "Oh, let me see." Luo Fan slightly smiled as he spoke. He was not surprised that Lin Tian Nan was able to comprehend a martial art from the process of him setting up the formation. However, he was still a little curious as to what kind of martial art Lin Tian Nan was able to comprehend. Lin Tian Nan did not dare to be negligent. He raised his hand, and wisps of chaotic Yuan Qi continuously gathered in the air. In his hands, a mass of gray fog condensed. It was incomparably condensed, as if it was a real existence. This was the technique that Lin Tian Nan was most familiar with and most proud of, the heavenly martial light, Divine Claw. After this Divine Claw appeared, it continuously twisted and changed. In the blink of an eye, it turned into thousands of complicated diagrams and tens of thousands of words. They condensed in front of Lin Tian Nan and spread out, forming an exquisite martial art. After cultivating for more than 10,000 years, Lin Tian Nan's control over the heavenly martial light divine claw had already reached the point of perfection. It was not impossible for him to condense it into such a large number of words and diagrams. Luo Fan, looked at Lin Tian Nan's actions and knew that Lin Tian Nan wanted to show off in front of him. He did not care and carefully examined the divine claw that was condensed from the heavenly martial light divine claw. When Lin Tian Nan saw Luo Fan smile, he knew that his intentions had been seen through by Luo Fan. His face slightly reddened, but he still looked at Luo Fan expectantly, as if he was waiting for Luo Fan to praise him. Luo Fan's realm was very high. With just a glance, he was able to absorb the entire divine claw into his mind. With a thought, it was as if he was looking at the lines on his palm. He could see through all the intricacies contained within. Not bad, not bad. This divine claw is enough to be passed down to future generations. It can be used as the source of a new school. Luo Fan was not stingy with his praise. After being praised by Luo Fan, Lin Tian Nan's face revealed a happy expression. However, he still said, "This is only disciples' personal comprehension. There must be countless mistakes. Master, please correct me." Luo Fan naturally knew that Lin Tian Nan had finally achieved something in front of his elders. However, he was too lazy to attack him. This divine claw did indeed have many mistakes. He only smiled and said, "There is no rush. This divine claw is already quite complete. You can comprehend it yourself in the future." Hearing this, Lin Tian Nan's face was both disappointed and proud. He dispersed the divine claw of heaven martial light. Seeing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh. He raised his hand and pressed down lightly. The magic cloud under their feet brought the two of them straight down at a very fast speed. After a while, they had already sunk into the gray mist that enveloped the entire huge lake. At this time, Lin Tian Nan's mood slightly calmed down. He turned his attention from the joy of his master's recognition of his divine claw to the new formation below. This formation has the ability to isolate the outside world. If there is no existence that surpasses Master's realm, there is no way to see what is happening inside the formation. Seeing that Lin Tian Nan had turned his attention to the formation, Luo Fan then said to Lin Tian Nan. Lin Tian Nan observed the formation. His face couldn't help but show a look of shame. Master is able to set up such a grand formation. To think that I only comprehended a single martial art. How dare I be so proud? This is too embarrassing, he thought to himself. From the outside, this formation looked like a gray fog. However, when Luo Fan used a special method to pass through it, he could see that there was no fog at all. The surroundings were clear. This formation can seal off space. Without a special method, one's cultivation cannot break through the 9th layer of the spirit gathering realm and cannot leave the range of this formation. You must remember this. Luo Fan brought Lin Tian Nan to the top of the mountain and said to him. Hearing this, Lin Tian Nan immediately knew what this formation was for. He quickly suppressed the shame in his heart and said, "Disciple will definitely remember this." Chapter 191. The past, the present, and the future happened in the blink of an eye. Luo Fan's figure flashed and appeared in the minor Kiliacosm. He floated in the void thousands of miles above the central continent and looked down at the sun and moon that were quickly revolving around the continent. His mind was calm. This minor Kiliacosm was created by him, and it was in his magic treasure, the Void Wuji Palace. He naturally had more confidence in this minor Kiliacosm than anyone else. At this moment, his mind moved slightly, and his mind fused with the entire minor Kiliacosm. Since the last time he carefully examined this minor Kiliacosm, more than 1,000 years had passed in the primordial world, but more than 870,000 years had passed in this minor Kiliacosm. In these 870,000 years, the changes in the minor Kiliacosm were almost earth-shattering. There was no need to talk about the changes on the central continent. There had already been 3 civilizations, which have been mentioned before. In the universe outside the central continent, the changes were even greater than the changes in the central continent. After more than 870,000 years of reproduction and evolution, the astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings that lived on the star fiend continent in the depths of the starry sky were no longer the same as before. At this moment, the number of these astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings had increased by trillions of times compared to the beginning. The countless astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings had occupied almost half of the starry sky. These more than 360 species occupied more than 360 vast areas with the star fiend continent as the center. The star fiend continent was not very large. When it was first constructed, it could only accommodate 81 kinds of astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings. The other astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings could only be barely accommodated after Luo Fan constructed an atmosphere. Now, the number of astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings had increased by tens of millions of times, so the Starfiend continent naturally could not accommodate them anymore. In addition, after those astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings cultivated divine abilities and transformed into human forms that were similar to those with innate Tao bodies, they were quite intelligent and knew how to manage. Hence, after this star, baleful continent was unable to accommodate all the astral wind, lightning, and fire life forms, it had become the holy land for all astral wind, lightning, and fire life forms. Only those astral wind, lightning, and fire life forms that had taken form and cultivated divine abilities could reside within. The other muddle-headed astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings could only be distributed in the more than 360 areas to be raised. Unknowingly, it had formed a rule that allowed for sustainable development. When Luo Fan saw these changes, he could not help clicking his tongue in wonder in his heart. The formation of this type of rule wasn't controlled by him, nor was it guided by the limitless child. It was formed naturally, containing some indescribable mysteries that were worth pondering. Although the starry sky of the spirit Kiliacosm was projected by the starry sky of the untainted world, under the effect of the rules of the spirit Kiliacosm and the endless primordial chi of chaos, after more than 870,000 years of evolution, it had already formed a mysterious main body of the star. It was no longer completely illusory like it was at the beginning. It looked as if there were countless stars in this spirit space. These stars, which had been formed by absorbing endless yuan qi for more than 870,000 years under the effect of the star essence, looked illusory and real at the same time. Although they were no longer illusory, they could not be said to be completely solid either. For ordinary living beings, they were not much different from non-existence. However, for those astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings, this kind of illusory stars contained infinite star essence and various kinds of yuan qi. It was the best place for them to live. It had only been less than 300,000 years since these astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings were born in the untainted world and entered this spirit Kiliacosm. In fact, they had been in this spirit Kiliacosm for a longer time. After such a long time, these astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings had already become more adapted to this spirit Kiliacosm than to the astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings. In other words, they had specific changes or evolved according to the starry sky environment of this spirit Kiliacosm. At this time, these 360 astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings were no longer the same as before. Instead, they had transformed into star beasts with various characteristics and incredible power. The essence of their power had gradually changed from the original astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings to the combination of various kinds of star essence and astral wind, lightning, and fire. It's a pity that the power from this cultivation is too heterogeneous, and it is a great obstacle for them to understand the rules of space. Perhaps the heavenly tribulation should also work on these star beasts. Luo Fan thought to himself. After understanding the changes of these astral wind, lightning, and fire living beings, Luo Fan instantly changed the nature of these living beings in his heart. Regardless of the original spiritual consciousness of these star beasts, after cultivating the 108 magical powers that Luo Fan had passed down. Although Luo Fan had only passed down 81 kinds of magical powers when he was preaching, he had said that the future Star Beast would eventually complete the 108 kinds of magical powers according to the imprint of the Great Tao. Their spiritual consciousness would become quite complete. In addition, after a long period of development, the Star Fiend continent had been built into a center of civilization that was not inferior to the Central Continent. In terms of power, it was even stronger than the Central Continent. It's a pity that in order for me to get through the calamity 37,000 years later, I can't give you the chance to transcend this world. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. After sighing for a while, his mind moved, and the mantra of the divine firmament heavenly thunder spirit technique flowed through his mind. At the same time, the earthly immortal Tao fruit in his body that had already turned to nothingness suddenly exploded and turned into a magic power that had a boundless sense of existence. It revolved around the circulation route of the divine firmament heavenly thunder spirit technique and circulated in his meridians at an incomparably fast speed. With this action of his, the entire many-thousand world began to produce a very strange vibration. This vibration rippled out from Luo Fan's body, and it spread to every inch of space in the entire world at a speed that almost surpassed everything. It seemed to be extremely mysterious, as if it contained some kind of indescribable great Tao truth between heaven and earth, and also seemed to be giving birth to a mysterious vitality in the boundless majesty. As the vibration continued, suddenly countless thunderbolts were born from everywhere in the void, constantly gathering in front of Luo Fan. They constantly bypassed the mysterious trajectories and compressed, gradually producing some kind of mysterious transformation. Luo Fan's great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes were still not covered. At this time, they were flashing with gold and silver light, tightly locking on the endless thunderbolts in front of him, distorting the space and time in the center of the thunderbolts. It seemed to be causing the existence that was being bred in the center of the thunderbolts to produce some kind of indescribable transformation. Space was distorted, and time was changing. There was a very strange spiritual sense that had no emotional fluctuations, no self-consciousness, but the most rational and intelligent spiritual sense suddenly appeared in the center of the thunderbolts. Following the appearance of this spiritual sense, the countless thunderbolts that were gathering in the void quietly disappeared. After a moment, they had completely disappeared without a trace, becoming untraceable. In Luo Fan's spiritual sense, which was integrated with this many-thousand world, could discover the operating rules of the entire many-thousand world. The originally mysterious and indescribable mystery of the many-thousand world had an even more mysterious and obscure rule and mystery. At this time, the spiritual sense that was produced from the center of the thunderbolts was completely rational, without any emotion, without any self-consciousness, and completely integrated with the entire many-thousand world. Suddenly, there was a very strange feeling in Luo Fan's mind. It seemed that there was some kind of will like the will of heaven, sweeping through the entire many-thousand world, and even wanted to sweep through his body. This kind of will was unfathomable, unshakable, and only knew to carry out some kind of evaluation according to some kind of mysterious mechanism. Even Luo Fan also felt that this will, through some kind of mysterious power, wanted to peep into his past, peep into his future. With a thought, Luo Fan's mind was as calm as still water, and the spiritual power that flowed in his body suddenly retracted, once again condensing into a mysterious and seemingly real, earthly, immortal Tao fruit in his lower abdomen. In an instant, this peep into the past and the future was shielded. The strange spiritual sense that was produced from the center of the thunderbolts was the thunder spirit that was condensed from the divine firmament heavenly thunder spirit technique. And this thought that swept through the entire world and could even peep into the past, present, and future of everything was sent out by this thunder spirit. This thunder technique was specially created by Luo Fan for this many-thousand world. It was born to be able to perfectly combine with all the conditions of the many-thousand world, and it could exert the most mysterious power. In addition, Luo Fan used his privilege as the creator of this many-thousand world to give the ability similar to the great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes to the thunder spirit just now, so that the thunder spirit could see through the past and future of a certain life at any time. In this way, it could also determine the strength of the heavenly tribulation according to the past, present, and future of the life, and determine the performance of the heavenly tribulation, as this thought without any emotion and no fluctuation swept through the entire many-thousand world. The energy distribution of the entire many-thousand world produced some kind of mysterious change. The essence energy of the stars that was originally evenly dispersed throughout the entire world gathered at over 300 locations in the central continent and the star-fiend continent through some sort of special method. Moreover, during this process, some sort of extremely profound transformation occurred, transforming into various kinds of powerful and even more unique types of astral winds, lightning, and fire, condensing into over 300 dense and oppressive tribulation clouds after the thunder spirit swept through the entire many-thousand world. It instantly set up more than 300 heavenly tribulations according to the strength of the life's energy, the level of the life's realm, and the various performances of the life's past, present, and future. For the people in the central continent, these heavenly tribulations provided an opportunity for the martial artists and cultivators who had reached the peak of their cultivation to transcend, so that they could comprehend some kind of space mystery of this many-thousand world, and then break through the void or ascend to the untainted land. For the living beings of the wind, thunder, and fire on the star-fiend continent, these heavenly tribulations were a kind of opportunity for them to temper their strength. If these living beings of the wind, thunder, and fire could rely on their own strength to pass through the heavenly tribulation, then they would comprehend some kind of space mystery. Whether it was their body, strength, or even spiritual sense, they would all obtain a qualitative improvement. Although they could not break through the shackles of the many-thousand world like cultivators and martial artists to enter the untainted land, they could live far longer than the strength they had before they passed through the heavenly tribulation. Chapter 192. The primal chaos bronze. Now that Luo Fan had reached this step, there was only one last step left to complete everything. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and in the void under his feet, an incomparably huge, invisible whirlpool suddenly formed. With the appearance of this whirlpool, countless star essence and strange evil aura gathered from the endless void, continuously condensing and compressing in the center of the whirlpool. In the end, it turned into countless threads of energy that were as thin as silk. As if they were alive, they spread wildly in the void with incomparable flexibility. Gradually, they outlined a huge three-dimensional formation with a circumference of 1,000 miles. The shape was like a huge ball, but also somewhat similar to a strange fruit. After this three-dimensional formation was formed, a mysterious stream of light began to flow from the center of the three-dimensional formation. It suddenly flowed through the entire three-dimensional formation. With the appearance of this stream of light, the entire formation flashed, and without any warning, disappeared into the void. However, although this formation disappeared without a sound, a very mysterious change had occurred in the void after this. At first glance, this part of the void did not seem any different from other places. However, it seemed to have some kind of special power that made people involuntarily cast their eyes in this place. If one had a keen perception, they would be able to feel that this place seemed to contain a world containing incomparably deep mysteries. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled slightly. He did not wait for the martial artists who were undergoing the tribulation transcendence to pass through the tribulation transcendence as cultivators. With a slight movement of his mind, the void distorted. After the distortion, his figure had already disappeared from this minor kiliocosm. The current Luo Fan no longer needed to enter and exit this minor kiliocosm through the door In the blink of an eye, he had already returned to the untainted land. What Luo Fan did just now, even the minor chiliocosm, only took less than a day. For the untainted land, it was only a few breaths. At this time, Lin Tian Nan did not have time to do what he wanted to do, to walk through this lake. Seeing Luo Fan reappear, Lin Tian Nan hurriedly stepped forward to greet him. Luo Fan waved his hand and said, "I will set up a teleportation array to connect to the lesser chiliocosm. Many warriors and cultivators will soon transcend. You should be prepared." Lin Tian Nan's face was filled with joy as he said, "Thank you, Master, for your mercy." Luo Fan had an extremely calm look on his face. As he raised his hand and waved it slightly, extremely dense chaotic energy was drawn out from the chaotic energy source tens of miles underground, condensed into strands of energy threads, and began moving and carving on the rocks under their feet. As the energy threads circulated and engraved, countless stone powders were instantly sent flying. Then, with a wave of incomparably dense, innate yuan qi, the powders dispersed in all directions and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Following the engraving of the energy threads, there was a mysterious and unfathomable aura being emitted from the mountain rock. It surged upwards like a heavenly pillar, proclaiming its incomparably strong existence to the world. Lin Tian then looked at the lines that were continuously being engraved under his feet. His eyes couldn't help but reveal shock and understanding. In his eyes, every single trace of energy contained an indescribable truth of martial arts. It seemed that as long as he could grasp even a tiny fraction of it, he would be able to push his own martial arts realm into the sky martial arts realm. Unfortunately, the mysteries contained within the moving lines had already reached an unimaginable level. Even with Lin Tian Nan's current comprehension ability of the second realm of life changing, he could only vaguely feel it, let alone understand the mysteries within. Thus, after 10 breaths, under Luo Fan's control, the lines were completely drawn. The entire mountaintop was completely covered by these lines, forming an array that was extremely similar to the array hidden in the lesser chiliocosm. However, he still couldn't understand anything. Even so, Lin Tian Nin did not feel too depressed in his heart. After all, he had already seen this path. The mysteries of this path were already engraved in his heart. In the future, when his realm reached a certain level, he would definitely be able to understand some of the principles within. At this time, the lines that were engraved on the mountain began to shine with billions of rays of light. These rays of light were extremely mysterious. They seemed to be extremely bright, but also seemed to be so small that they couldn't be seen. They continued to shine, and as if a large hand had swept past, they gradually erased the countless lines that were engraved by the primal chaos threads. It was as if the mountaintop had never been engraved with any lines, and it once again returned to its original state. It was incomparably mysterious. As the lines were erased, the mysterious aura that was emitted from the mountaintop, like a heavenly pillar that could support the heavens, became even more intense. It became even more condensed. Finally, when it reached its peak, it suddenly retracted at the speed of light. In an instant, it had completely retracted into the mountain, causing the mountain to once again return to its original state. At first glance, there was nothing different. However, if one were to carefully sense it, they would know that there seemed to be a mysterious world being nurtured within the mountain. At this point, everything had been completed. If the creature that had passed through the heavenly tribulation in the minor chiliocosm was able to comprehend the mysteries of space, it would activate the large formation in the void above the minor chiliocosm. The formation would produce a light of guidance and lead the creature into the large formation. Then, using the mysterious connection between the two large formations, through incomparably complicated changes, the creature would finally be transported to the top of the mountain. No matter where the limitless Void Palace was located, even if it was billions of miles away from the large formation in the Great Desolate Land, it would still be the same. Luo Fan looked around and discovered that the mountaintop was empty. However, it didn't look too good. With a slight thought, his left hand moved, and a piece of primal chaos bronze with a diameter of 100 feet rushed out from his universe in the sleeve. After observing for a while, he raised his right hand and rubbed it in the air. In an instant, an invisible force appeared out of nowhere and directly acted on the piece of primal chaos bronze, causing it to constantly change its shape like plasticine. In the process, its size kept shrinking and condensing. In the end, it shrank into a huge steel that was 10 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and 10 feet thick. It fell in the center of the mountain, causing the whole mountain to shake for a while. After that, it seemed to be even more stable and unbreakable, like a mysterious existence that could suppress the void. The primal chaos bronze steel was constantly emitting a dignified, heavy, and stable aura, suppressing the mountain. Luo Fan raised his hand and casually sketched. Thousands of marks that seemed to be irregular but contained some kind of supreme truth appeared on the surface of the primal chaos bronze steel, outlining the endless years of the primal chaos bronze steel, as if it had been standing on a mountain since ancient times. This was the little chance of survival that he had left for the creatures that had transcended from the minor chiliocosm and come to the great desolate land. The thousands of marks on the primal chaos bronze steel did not contain any martial arts techniques, nor did they contain any cultivation techniques. They only contained a trace of the supreme truth of cultivation that Luo Fan had comprehended and contained the essence of the evolution of life. No matter what kind of cultivation technique the creatures cultivated, they could comprehend the rules of the great desolate land and the basic cultivation techniques that were suitable for them from these marks. Disciple is bold, but I don't know why Master doesn't just accept them as disciples so that you can pass on your martial arts. Lin Tian saw Luo Fan's actions and asked with some doubt. Luo Fan smiled and said, "They have their own opportunities. Moreover, I don't need so many disciples. Yes, your martial arts have already reached a higher level. If you meet a creature that is suitable for the true heavenly martial divine chapter, you can accept it as a disciple and pass on this martial art. You don't need to ask me anymore." Luo Fan thought for a while and continued. "Disciple understands." Lin Tian bowed. The first part of Luo Fan's sentence was fine. It only meant that he didn't think much of other creatures. However, the second part meant that Luo Fan acknowledged that he had the qualifications to open his own sect. That was the greatest affirmation for Lin Tian. He couldn't help but be in awe. Luo Fan nodded and said indifferently, "A Holy Spirit is about to transcend. You can handle it yourself. You only need to remember not to delay your own cultivation because of this matter." Lin Tian bowed again. Disciple will work hard to cultivate and won't dare to slack off. This matter is over. Master is leaving. Luo Fan saw that Lin Tian understood the gravity of the matter and nodded his head indifferently. As he said this, he didn't wait for Lin Tian's reaction. His figure turned into a rainbow and shot into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he had already disappeared from Lin Tian's sight. Lin Tian was naturally reluctant. He wanted to ask him to stay, but he realized that Luo Fan had disappeared. He could only helplessly look in the direction that Luo Fan disappeared in and kowtow to express his reluctance and respect. Just as he finished kowtowing, an extremely strange spatial distortion suddenly appeared behind him. At the same time, a rather strong aura surged out from there. In an instant, Lin Tian knew that the second person who had transcended beyond a small chiliocosm had appeared. He turned his head. As expected, the space in front of the primal chaos bronze tablet rippled strangely. After the ripples passed, a slender and beautiful figure appeared in front of the primal chaos bronze tablet. Her back was facing Lin Tian. The second person who had transcended from a small chiliocosm was actually a woman. Lin Tian sensed for a bit, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. This woman was actually a warrior who had broken through to the 9th level of the transcendent realm. This made him overjoyed. This is the world above the world. The woman took a deep breath and said with a satisfied tone, "This is the great desolate world, the world after breaking through the void. It is also the legendary immortal realm." Lin Tian continued, Congratulations on achieving transcendence, Junior." When the woman heard the voice, she slowly turned around to face Lin Tian-nan. Lin Tian-nan saw the woman's face clearly and couldn't help but feel an indescribable shock. He wasn't shocked by the woman's beauty, although she was indeed devastatingly beautiful. What he was shocked by was the woman's gaze. It was a gaze that could only be possessed by someone who had experienced the vicissitudes of time and seen through the world. Seeing this gaze, Lin Tian-nan instantly thought of himself 1,000 years ago when he had just entered the primal chaos with his master. An indescribable feeling of pity and intimacy welled up in his heart. So, the legendary warriors who have broken through to the 9th level of the transcendent realm really do exist. The woman's face revealed a smile of realization as she said softly, although this woman was only a warrior who had broken through to the 9th level of the transcendent realm and was hundreds of times weaker than Lin Tian-nan, according to the connection between the two warriors, she could feel that the young man in front of her was a warrior who was many times stronger than her. "Ruhuan is new here. I hope Senior can give me some pointers." She then bowed to Lin Tian-nan. At this moment, the woman's body was broken and her hair was messy. It was obvious that she had experienced a lot of hardships to be able to come to this primal chaos. Chapter 193. Tin Yuan Hui Luo Fan naturally did not care about how Lin Tian-nan managed the martial warriors and cultivators who were continuously undergoing tribulation in the lesser Thousand Realms. At this moment, he had already transformed into a long rainbow and was flying 90,000 kilometers high in the sky. Under the layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire, he was shooting towards Buzhou Mountain. The speed at which he flew could be seen from the hundreds of thousands of feet long after images that were left behind in the air. Buzhou Mountain was where his cave was located and also where his roots were. In addition, he had previously told Fentian and Yu Su of that location. At this moment, he had nothing else to do, so he had to return to Buzhou Mountain. The distance of over 3 billion kilometers was considered extremely far, but Luo Fan only spent a few days to cross it. On this day, the rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into was blocked by Buzhou Mountain in front of him. He suddenly raised his head and followed the mountain of Buzhou Mountain, passing through the 10,000 kilometers thick layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire, and arrived at the top of Buzhou Mountain. When he passed through Hong Jun's purple firmament cave, Luo Fan swept his gaze across and discovered that the purple firmament cave no longer existed. At this moment, the location had already returned to the scene when the cave was first opened. It was extremely mysterious, as if time had flowed backwards. Luo Fan was not surprised, because, with just a glance, he knew that this was because Hong Jun had already successfully refined a magic treasure and moved the purple firmament cave into it. This was not a simple matter of moving material into it, but rather it had directly absorbed this space into it. In addition to the mysteries of Buzhou Mountain, it had produced such a strange phenomenon. I never thought that unknowingly, my disciple would also be able to refine magic treasures on his own. Luo Fan could not help but feel a little emotional in his heart, and a slight sense of desolation emerged from his heart. His speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already traversed thousands of kilometers and arrived at the top of the mountain. After reaching the top of the mountain, he descended onto the ocean of chaotic origin chi. With a wave of his hand, the limitless void palace shook and separated from the world of his sea of consciousness. Through some mysterious mechanism, it appeared in front of him. Then, it descended and landed on the surface of the sea like an island. Along with the fluctuations of the chaotic Yuan Qi Sea, it slightly rippled. The Wuji Palace had its own treasure spirit, the Wuji Child. After the Limitless Void Palace was upgraded, the Limitless Boy remained within the dimensional realm, stabilizing it. Even so, he was still able to sense the changes in the outside environment. At this moment, the moment the Wuji Palace came into contact with the chaotic Qi Ocean, the entire palace became very active under the control of the Wuji Boy. It was like a black hole, crazily absorbing the endless liquid chaotic Qi around. However, This time, it did not pour the chaotic origin energy into the small kiliacosm or fuse it into the palace. Instead, it constantly fused the chaotic origin energy into the dimensional realm. This dimensional realm was something that Luo Fan had used a trick to open up. It couldn't compare to a true dimensional realm, and there were even signs of instability in its own space. If it weren't for the limitless boy dissolving into the top of the dimensional realm to stabilize the space, then after so many years, the dimensional realm might have already shrunk by several times. At this time, after obtaining this endless liquid chaos origin energy, Limitless Boy naturally wouldn't waste it. Instead, he spread this chaos origin energy throughout the entire hall. It was like flowing water seeping into a sponge, constantly seeping in and fusing with the entire dimensional realm. During this process, the stability of the dimensional realm was constantly strengthened, and the pressure that the Limitless Boy had to bear in the process of stabilizing the dimensional realm was reduced. Chaotic origin energy was a kind of origin energy that was tainted with the chaotic nature of chaos. It was born with an inconceivable power. Whether it was the degree of condensation or the degree of mystery, it was incomparable to any other origin energy in the world. Among them, the most mysterious power was to promote the evolution of the world. With such mysterious, chaotic origin energy constantly fusing into the dimensional realm, it naturally had countless benefits for the dimensional realm. Although it didn't have an immediate effect, it faintly strengthened the stability of the dimensional realm, and even caused the dimensional realm to faintly expand. Luo Fan's mind moved. He saw every change in the limitless palace in his eyes. He knew that if this continued, then in less than a yuan hui, the dimensional realm would be completely stabilized, and the Limitless Boy would no longer need to fuse into the dimensional realm to suppress the void. He would be able to move freely like before. Understanding this, Luo Fan didn't disturb him. With a thought, a dark blue light was released from his body. It fell in front of him and turned into an incomparably cute loli. It was the Xuanji boy. Ah, the pressure here is so great. I don't want to stay here. Master, let's leave here. The style of the Xuanji boy was completely different from that of the Limitless Boy and the Jifeng boy. As soon as he appeared, he immediately complained. Luo Fan didn't care about the complaints of the Xuanji boy, who didn't have free will. He just said, "There's endless chaotic origin energy here. You can absorb the origin energy here and refine yourself. Don't slack off." With that, he turned around and went into the Limitless Palace. He entered the platform in the center of the lightning pool of the mini kiliacosm. "Smelly Master." The Xuanji boy left these 3 unconvinced words in Luo Fan's mind. Then, he accepted his fate and began to absorb the chaotic origin energy to refine himself. As a protective magic treasure, the materials used by the Xuanji boy were not solid, but all kinds of evil spirits and origin energy. This nature determined that while it had infinite defensive power, it could constantly absorb all kinds of suitable origin energy to strengthen itself. It could also be tempered by all kinds of origin energy to make itself tougher. To her, the top of Buzhou Mountain could definitely be called a treasure land for cultivation. To the Xuanji boy, cultivating here was more beneficial than anywhere else. Although she was grumbling, she didn't mean it. In about 200 yuan hui, I should be able to sort out all kinds of mystical abilities and spells. Luo Fan thought to himself. At this moment, there were still 37,000 years left before the Great Calamity arrived. If he sped up the time between the mini kiliacosm and the medium kiliacosm to the extreme, he would have more than 200 yuan hui. For Luo Fan, this period of time was really quite a long time. If it was in the past, even before he sensed the arrival of the Great Calamity, he would never have made such a long plan. However, the situation was different now. The Great Calamity was imminent, and his life was hanging by a thread. He had no choice but to plan. After the Pangu primordial spirit dissipated, the number of mystical abilities and spells in Luo Fan's mind was like the stars in the sky. The number had reached an unimaginable level. However, it was precisely because there were so many of them that these spells seemed too chaotic. Putting aside the fact that their powers were uneven, what was worse was that many of them were repetitive or had the same effects, but were fundamentally different divine abilities and magic arts. This was a huge obstacle to his application. Back then, when he had just attained the Tao fruit, he had spent 3,000 years to roughly cultivate these spells. However, from then until now, the spells he had used were only a few of the countless spells. Almost 9,999 out of every 10,999 of his divine abilities and magic arts were never used again after he had mastered them. It could be said that it was a huge waste. It made him feel like a tycoon who had billions of wealth but only knew how to eat instant noodles every day. If he had to deal with a great calamity 37,000 years later, it would naturally be impossible to use this state to deal with it, because this would not allow him to unleash all of his power. At this time, Luo Fan had just broken through the true immortal realm of the Earth Immortals' Tao fruit and became a golden immortal. Therefore, for a very long period of time, it would be impossible for him to make much progress in his cultivation realm. It was not worth it to want to increase his strength by increasing his cultivation realm. It was better to spend time sorting out the countless kinds of mystical abilities and spells in his mind. In addition, his cultivation realm had already improved by many times compared to the last time he cultivated these spells. He had enough knowledge and enough cultivation to sort out these mystical abilities and spells. It could be predicted that when he sorted out these mystical abilities and spells in the future, he would combine the repetitive spells and get rid of the useless ones. Finally, he would form a system. Then his strength would increase by several times, or even dozens of times, or even hundreds of times. After making a rough estimation in his mind, Luo Fan could not help but secretly regret that he should have started sorting out these mystical abilities and spells when he first obtained them. If he could have sorted them out in the beginning, it would have been at least several times easier for him these years, and he might even have improved his cultivation realm. With his thoughts in a mess, Luo Fan sorted out his mind, and his mind gradually became calm. He sat cross-legged on the platform, and his mind gradually sank into his memories. He wandered and comprehended the countless divine powers and magic arts. At the same time, the earthly immortal's fruit of the way in his lower abdomen was vibrating in a mysterious way, constantly swallowing the rich primordial chi that gathered from all over the spirit space on the platform. It was constantly refining the earthly immortal's fruit of the way, slowly purifying the Dharma units contained in the fruit of the way. Bit by bit, the fruit of the way was polished, the Dharma power in it, and the energy in the Dharma units. After all, he had roughly cultivated these endless mystical abilities and spells before. Although it was troublesome and complicated to sort them out this time, and he needed to spend a lot of energy, it was not too difficult. In the process of Luo Fan sinking into the sea of mystical abilities and spells, time flew by without any value. In the blink of an eye, 1,296,000 years had passed. It was a full 10 yuan wei. For the primordial world, it had been more than 1,000 years. Chapter 194. The scripture of the Tao Fruit 1, 296,000 years, which was a full 10 yuan wei. This period of time was so long that it had already exceeded the time that Luo Fan had experienced since he came to the primordial world. It could be said to be the longest span of time that Luo Fan had ever experienced. During these 10 yuan hui, Luo Fan's figure didn't move at all, nor did he circulate the nameless cultivation technique that he cultivated. He only relied on the instinct of the earthly, immortal fruit of the Tao to absorb energy and temper his magic power. Therefore, although such a long period of time had passed, his magic power didn't improve much. Up until now, he had only tempered the magic power of the golden immortal realm to become more smooth and agile. Just as he expected, through the hard work of these 10 yuan hui, his strength was tens or even hundreds of times stronger than before. Because through these 10 yuan hui, he had already organized the countless magic techniques and magic powers that filled his memory into a scripture of the Tao fruit of the Tao that contained 12,960 scrolls. In this scripture of the Tao fruit of the Tao, every scroll contained one or even several magic techniques or magic powers. 12,960 scrolls contained almost all the magic powers and magic techniques in Luo Fan's memory, although many of them had been eliminated, and it could even be said that most of the magic powers and magic techniques had been eliminated. The power contained in all the magic powers and magic techniques was contained in the scripture. Moreover, because the number of magic techniques and magic techniques had been reduced, it made it faster and more convenient for him to use them. Moreover, because he had reorganized and combined the repeated magic techniques and magic techniques in his memory, the power of many of them was countless times stronger than before, and it increased his strength from another aspect. On this day, Luo Fan carefully savored the scripture that reverberated in his mind. Finally, when he felt that he had organized it perfectly and without any flaws, he opened his eyes. In an instant, 2 rays of gold and silver light flashed in his eyes, and the space around him distorted. It seemed as if the flow of time had sped up by tens of times, and the stability of the space had increased by hundreds of times. This process lasted for quite a while before the gold and silver light in his eyes faded. I never expected that I would obtain such gains. I've actually obtained the qualifications to seek the grand Dao fruit. Luo Fan sighed with emotion in his heart, and his heart was filled with indescribable happiness. The Tao fruit Grand Tao was divided into 4 stages: Earthly Immortal Tao fruit, Grand Unity Tao fruit, Zenith Tao fruit, and Origin Tao fruit. However, the differences between them were different from other cultivation techniques. To be able to attain the Earthly Immortal Tao fruit, it was not necessary to cultivate all the realms below the individual immortal to perfection. Similarly, to be able to attain the Primordial Unity Tao fruit, it did not mean that one had to cultivate the Earthly Immortal Tao fruit to perfection. That kind of qualification only represented that one's cultivation had reached a certain level and crossed a certain boundary. Just like an ordinary student who is qualified to participate in the college entrance examination, it doesn't mean that he has mastered all the knowledge below high school. Therefore, even though Luo Fan had obtained the qualifications to seek the Primordial Unity Tao fruit, if he were to attack the Primordial Unity Tao fruit at this moment, then what awaited him would only be failure and a waste of energy. 960 volumes seemed to be an extremely large number, but compared to Luo Fan's soul, that had transformed into Pangu's spine, and compared to his clear and pure mind, it was like an ordinary person facing 2 choices. There was utterly no complicated or difficult choice, and he could practically choose the most suitable divine ability and technique to deal with various situations with a single thought. Luo Fan stood up and took a light stride forward, and without causing any spatial fluctuations, his figure had already arrived at a place in the depths of the Minor Thousand world where there were no star beasts. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, and there were no traces to be found, nor any trace of chisel marks. It was as if he was born to instantly arrive at this place from the platform. This Tao fruit's Grand Tao scripture contained the fundamental cultivation technique that Luo Fan cultivated, the nameless cultivation technique, within it as well. However, this nameless cultivation technique wasn't a single volume within the 12,960 scriptures, and it existed as a general outline instead. Thus, the height of its status was obvious. On the other hand, the profundities of the Pangu chaotic heavenly pupils weren't inferior to the nameless cultivation technique, and they formed the first volume of this scripture. As for various other techniques and divine abilities like the heavenly eyes, leaf fire golden eyes, clairvoyance eyes, dharma eyes, and so on and so forth, they were contained within this first volume, and they existed as various methods of application of the Pangu chaotic heavenly pupils. Besides that, these 12,960 scriptures also contained the equipment refinement scroll, treasure-seeking scroll, flying scroll, earth traversing scroll, mountain traversing scroll, earth traversing scroll, time traversing scroll, sky slashing scroll, and so on and so forth. Practically countless techniques and divine abilities that Luo Fan had thought of and couldn't imagine. There was even a Soul Core Scroll and a Talisman Scroll that contained the Soul Core Grand Dao and Talisman Grand Dao. However, the source of these two Grand Daos had already been changed to the Dao Fruit Grand Dao, and it itself only existed as a method of application. It could be said that this Dao Fruit scripture was all-inclusive, and all the divine abilities that could be found and imagined in the world could be found within it. If the scripture was spread out, then practically every single volume could become a Grand Dao, and every single volume was sufficient to allow a cultivator to cultivate to a supreme realm that was equivalent to the earthly immortal Dao fruit and obtain immortality. Luo Fan floated in midair as he raised his hand and lightly circled in the air. Then a strange, three-dimensional formation was formed out of thin air, and it instantly enveloped the spherical space within an area of 50,000 kilometers. Along with the formation of this formation, the area within an area of 50,000 kilometers seemed to have been instantly isolated from the minor chiliocosm, and it formed a complete and independent mysterious space. This three-dimensional formation was precisely a grand formation recorded within the 7,963 volume of the 12,960 volumes, the Trapping Formation Scroll. It was formed from the combination of a few tens of thousands of types of formations, and it was capable of splitting open space and isolating the world from the outside world. Along with the formation of this three-dimensional formation, Luo Fan raised his hand and pounced in the air, and an invisible force was produced. In an instant, the three stars within an area of 50,000 kilometers exploded into countless star essence, various kinds of primordial chi, and baleful aura that filled every inch of the void within an area of 50,000 kilometers like paste. This pounce was not a simple movement, but a martial art recorded in the 682nd volume of the Dao Fruit Scripture, the Martial Art Scroll, and it was called the Sky Covering Invisible Hand. The core of the stars in the minor chiliocosm was the projection of the endless starry sky of the primordial world. The reason why it could have a physical body was because of some mysterious mechanism that attracted the infinite star essence, various kinds of primordial chi, and various kinds of baleful aura. The stars formed in this way had a different relationship with the starry sky of the entire minor chiliocosm, and it could be exploded at will without affecting the stability of the starry sky. As the golden and silver light flashed in Luo Fan's eyes, his body made countless movements, and in an instant, countless mysterious and unpredictable trajectories were drawn by him. As he moved, the void, which was filled with chaotic primordial chi, star essence, and baleful aura, began to riot violently. The infinite energy quickly gathered, and in the blink of an eye, it gathered into a speck of light in front of Luo Fan, which was as small as a speck of dust. The speck of light only appeared for a moment before it suddenly exploded. Endless scenes unfolded before his eyes. Chaos opened up. Heaven and earth took shape. All living things evolved. Endless vitality spread, and endless battles appeared. In the end, heaven and earth collapsed, and everything returned to chaos. The evolution of these scenes lasted for 10,000 years. During this process, Luo Fan's movements did not stop for a moment. Mysterious and unpredictable trajectories appeared with his movements, and endless mysterious, indescribably wonderful aura and energy spread in all directions with his movements. All kinds of divine abilities and magic arts recorded in the 12,960 scrolls of scriptures were imbued in his movements in a very subtle way, making him look like a supreme god who controlled the entire area of 100,000 miles in circumference and the entire process from the creation of the world to its destruction. It was he who had spent 10,000 years using all the divine abilities and spells recorded in the scripture of the Great Way to test the world. Through these 10,000 years of testing, Luo Fan's control of the scripture of the Great Way had reached a state of perfection. Almost with a wave of his hand, he could imbue certain divine abilities and spells into his movements, achieving an effect that previously required him to calm his mind and circulate his magic power. In fact, the world that had evolved within a radius of 100,000 miles in the past 10,000 years was not the real world. The various living beings within it possessed boundless vitality, and they weren't the real vitality either. All of them were formed from Luo Fan's divine abilities and spells, and they were formed from merging the 12,960 divine abilities contained in the scripture of the Great Way into the boundless vital energy, baleful chi, and vital energy of the stars. The entire process of the world's creation and destruction was formed from all the divine abilities and spells recorded in the scripture of the Great Way that clashed, cooperated, and fought with each other. After carefully recalling the entire process of testing the world, Luo Fan let out a long sigh of relief, and he revealed an extremely satisfied expression. He raised his hand and pressed down lightly, and there were over 1,000 divine abilities contained within this single movement of his in a subtle and profound manner. Along with this movement, the space in an area of 50,000 kilometers warped, and then it seemed as if time was flowing in reverse. The extremely chaotic vital energy of the stars, vital energy, and baleful chi separated in an orderly manner under the effect of some sort of inconceivable mechanism, and they condensed once more into the 3 stars that had exploded apart. As these 3 stars formed once more, the space in an area of 50,000 kilometers returned to its original state before Luo Fan arrived. It was like nothing had changed at all. Chapter 195. The shape of the scripture at this moment, in Luo Fan's body, among the 518,400 Buzhou mountain-shaped magic power units that made up the seemingly real and illusory fruit of a mortal way, there were 12,960 strange existences within each magic power unit. These strange existences were either talismans, runes, patterns, or brands. All sorts of strange and different things. Yet all of them contained boundless profundities, and it seemed as if indescribable changes were being displayed within them at all times. Every single one of them represented a scripture in the Tao Fruit's Grand Tao Scripture. 12,960 strange existences represented the 12,960 scriptures of the Tao Fruit and the Way Scripture. These strange existences had only been produced recently. During those 10,000 years, Luo Fan had used the scripture of the Great Way to test his cultivation method, and they had only appeared because his control and comprehension of the scripture of the Great Way had reached an extremely profound level. It was precisely because these strange existences had appeared within his magic power units that Luo Fan was able to use the various divine abilities and techniques recorded in the 12,960 scrolls of scripture so easily and effortlessly. At this moment, these 12,960 strange existences were like a nebula within the 518,400 magic power units, forming an organic whole that contained endless mysteries. It was as if no power could separate them from the magic power units. The earthly immortal Way Fruit in his lower dantian was constantly vibrating in a strange manner. Along with this strange vibration, an endless amount of chaotic energy was constantly being inhaled and exhaled, and then surged into all the magic power units through an extremely mysterious method. Finally, it fused with the 12,960 strange existences, making these strange existences seem to become more mysterious, more complete, and more closely integrated with the entire magic power unit. Suddenly, a certain space at the top of Buzhou Mountain produced some kind of weak but extremely wide ripple, like a small stone thrown into calm water. After the ripple, Luo Fan's figure appeared out of thin air at the center of the ripple. It was precisely Luo Fan who had directly broken through the barrier of 2 spaces without the help of the door of the Void Wuji Palace and returned to the untainted world. Compared to before, the current Luo Fan's appearance in the untainted world was much greater. At the very least, at this moment, he could already shake the space of the untainted world. Luo Fan raised his head to look at the sky. his expression extremely relaxed. He spread his hands and took a deep breath, and then a surging chaotic energy surged from all directions, directly into his body, and then, through some mysterious method, into the earthly immortal wave fruit, and finally into the 12,960 strange existences within the magic power units. Throughout the entire process, it was as if he had transformed into a black hole, crazily sucking in everything around him, but not out. He had stayed in the mini Kiliacosm for 10 yuan wei. Even though he was wholeheartedly sorting out the divine sense and magic arts in his memory, he could still feel the pressure brought by the passage of time to his mind and soul, as well as the vicissitudes brought by the passage of time. At this moment, when he returned to the untainted world again, the impact of suddenly discovering that time had only flowed for more than 1,000 years made him have a strange feeling of getting back time. However, it made the pressure and vicissitudes that had been suppressing his mind and soul dissipate a lot. After a long while, he stopped the process of devouring the chaotic energy. The surrounding chaotic energy returned to its normal state, flowing slowly. He raised his hand and waved. The void Wuji palace, which had sunk into the depths of the liquefied chaotic energy sea for more than 1,000 years because of the surging chaotic energy, rose rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had already floated above the liquefied chaotic energy sea with a thought. He found that the stability of the dimensional world inside the void Wuji palace was a little stronger than before. Although it still couldn't withstand the faster flow of time, it was much easier to withstand the time flow of twice as fast as before. At least, Wuji Boy, who had integrated into the central top of the hall of the dimensional world, could show his head and look around. Obviously, he had some strength left. With a thought, he raised his hand and pressed down. The void Wuji palace sank to the bottom of the sea again. Luo Fan's strength had been greatly improved. It was difficult for him to make great progress in a short period of time. There was no need for him to cultivate again. Therefore, at this time, he didn't need to use the void Wuji palace to cultivate. Thus, it was better to let the limitless void palace absorb the chaos origin energy here and fuse it into the dimensional realm, stabilizing the dimensional realm. If the dimensional realm was stabilized to the point where it could withstand the flow of time 3 times faster, then the time that was wasted could be easily recovered. This was just like the saying that Luo Fan had heard in the future: sharpening the knife won't delay the chopping of wood. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind moved. With a pinch of his fingers, he had already understood all the experiences of the people related to him over the years. First of all, the one that he cared about the most, and also the one that had changed the most, was his only female disciple, Guangpu. Thousands of years ago, Guangpu received Luo Fan's advice. She knew that her lucky chance was in the bright moon of the endless starry sky. At that time, she made a prompt decision to bid farewell to her husband and son. She wanted to cross the long distance to the endless starry sky and directly go to the moon to find her lucky chance. At this time, after thousands of years, she had already passed through the 9 layers of astral wind, lightning, and fire and entered the endless starry sky. It took her thousands of years to break through the 9 layers of astral wind, lightning, and fire. It was not because Guangpu's speed was too slow, but because of the obstruction of the astral wind, lightning, and fire. To the current Luo Fan, the astral wind, lightning, and fire layer was like his own backyard. He could walk freely. But don't forget, when Luo Fan had just come to the untainted world and had just comprehended the nameless cultivation method, even the first layer of the astral wind, lightning, and fire was enough to make his body explode. If it was not for the fact that the cultivation method he cultivated was quite mysterious and could quickly refine and strengthen his body, there might not be today's Luo Fan. Thousands of years ago, although Guangpu was much stronger than Luo Fan, there was no qualitative improvement. It was impossible for her to compare to Luo Fan when he triggered the heavenly tribulation. Even when Luo Fan triggered the heavenly tribulation, he could only barely withstand the environment of the 4th layer of the astral wind, lightning, and fire. Therefore, to Guangpu, crossing the 9 layers of the astral wind, lightning, and fire was equivalent to facing endless challenges. Under countless obstacles that could destroy her, she had to kill her way out. Under such circumstances, being able to cross the 9 layers of the astral wind, lightning, and fire in a few thousand years was already beyond Luo Fan's expectations. She was actually able to successfully pass through the 6 heavenly tribulations during this process. This improvement is actually so huge. It seems that the benefits of the white poplar spirit root to her are beyond imagination. Luo Fan thought to himself. The mystical ability that Luo Fan had used to calculate just now was not the yin-yang measurement method. Instead, it was a technique that he had formed by combining all the mystical abilities and techniques related to deducing the past and the future in his memory. It was a technique recorded in the 972 volume of the Tao Fruits Great Tao Scripture, the calculation volume. This technique combined the advantages of various mystical abilities and techniques that contained the ability to deduce. It was even more mysterious than the yin-yang measurement method. The deduction results were more accurate, and it consumed less energy. However, it was enough for him to clearly deduce every bit of Guangpu's experience over the past few thousand years. He could even deduce that Guangpu would step onto the moon in 8 years, 3 months, and 21 days. And when the time came, there would be a great change that exceeded his expectations. Under such circumstances, he was naturally extremely clear about Guangpu's improvement over the past few years. 8 years, 3 months, and 21 days. Just what kind of great change will happen? Luo Fan muttered to himself. After his cultivation realm had increased, even when he thought of the Great Tribulation, there wasn't much of a ripple in his heart. However, at this moment, he felt an extremely indescribable feeling. It was as if he was reluctant to part, but also as if he was happy, and even more so, as if he was extremely indifferent. This complicated and indescribable feeling caused him to be completely at a loss. He couldn't figure it out. Even so, there was one thing that he could be completely sure of. That was the great change that would happen 8 years later was definitely not a bad thing for him. Since it wasn't a bad thing, Luo Fan also lightly let go of the change regarding Guangpu. He turned his attention to his own children, Luo Fu and his son. After thousands of years of cultivation, Luo Fu's cultivation had steadily increased. Compared to thousands of years ago, the divine fire was already more vigorous. Under the burning and tempering of the divine fire, his spirit had already undergone some strange changes. As for Luo Fu's son, Luo Chunyang, he could no longer be called Bauer. Today, Luo Chunyang had already grown into a handsome young man. Although his essence was still pure and clear, there was an additional kind of steadiness and solemnity. In the 9 Heaven Sun transformation technique that Luo Chunyang cultivated had already been cultivated to the peak of the Qi refinement realm. He only needed a crucial understanding to be able to form the primordial elixir. This kind of cultivation speed was extremely fast. Compared to Luo Fu back then, it was more than 10 times faster. Luo Fu was both happy and envious at the same time. And at this moment, Luo Fu was planning to take Luo Chunyang away from the best valley where they lived. Although they had lived there for thousands of years and had already developed deep feelings for each other. But for Luo Chunyang, who had already reached a bottleneck and could only increase his knowledge through travel, touch his soul, and obtain enlightenment, he still made such a difficult decision. I didn't expect that the Fu-er who used to hug my knees and act like a spoiled child is actually really grown up. Luo Fan finally truly felt the growth of Luo Fu. Chapter 196. Hongjun preaching about refining treasures by Luo Fan. After Luo Fan sighed, he turned his attention to his other disciple, Hongjun. With Luo Fu's strength and the existence of Ji Fong Boy, it was enough to guarantee the safety of the father and son, so there was no need for Luo Fan to pay too much attention to him. After attaining the Earth Immortal Tao Fruit, Hongjun had become more and more independent. This time, he returned to Buzhou Mountain alone and took away the cave abode, without telling Luo Fan. Although it was because Luo Fan was no longer at Buzhou Mountain, it could also be seen that Hongjun had changed. Regarding this change, Luo Fan's mood was quite complicated. There was a kind of joy of seeing his disciple grow up, but there was also a kind of slight disappointment that his disciple's dependence on him was greatly reduced. Fortunately, Luo Fan's cultivation realm was still far higher than Hongjuan's. At this time, with the help of the calculation volume of the Tao Fruit Scripture, he could easily calculate Hongjuan's past, present, and future. Hongjuan's current state and the experience of the past thousands of years were all included into his mind. I didn't expect that he already has the appearance of a Tao ancestor. After seeing what Hongjun had done in the past thousands of years, Luo Fan could not help but feel a little emotional. At this moment, Hongjun had already gone to the depths of the untainted land, above the 9th layer of the astral wind, thunder, and fire layer, which was more than 40 billion miles away from Buzhou Mountain. In that position, there was a magic treasure shaped like a tower suspended in the void. The tower door was wide open, and endless astral wind, thunder, fire, and life entered it, while he himself sat cross-legged in the void inside the tower magic treasure and began to preach the great Tao. Of course, most of his Grand Daos were the most basic portion of the Grand Daos that Luo Fan had once told him about, and only a very small portion of it was what he'd comprehended during these years of attaining the earthly immortal Tao fruit. Even though it was like this, the Grand Tao he spoke of was rather profound, and it possessed an indescribable attraction towards the boundless life forms of wind, lightning, and fire. It was like a sudden wake-up call that jolted them awake from their dazed and muddled states, allowing them to know how to cultivate and how to absorb energy. With the help of the tower-shaped magic treasure, the preaching voice spread to a radius of 1 million kilometers. The voice contained an indescribable attractive force, constantly attracting all the wind, lightning, fire, and life within the area, making them surge into the tower-shaped magic treasure. The aura of the magic treasure grew stronger as the astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms poured into it. It was as if the astral wind, thunder, and fire life forms that had surged into it could provide it with energy. As soon as Luo Fan saw this change, he knew that at the same time Hongjun was refining the magic treasure, he'd fused some sort of combined formation into the magic treasure. It was even to the extent that he was able to guess exactly what type of combined formation it was through the changes in the magic treasure. It was precisely because of this that this magic treasure was able to combine the astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms that entered it with itself. And this magic treasure was able to rely on the boundless energy of the astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms to increase its might. It was also precisely because of the existence of this combined formation that the more astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms that poured into it, the stronger these life forms were, the stronger the might of the magic treasure would be. When he knew this, he completely understood the meaning of Hongjuan's lecture on the Grand Tao at that location. It had the intention of luring the astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms into it, and it also had the intention of strengthening the might of the astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms. Within the tower-shaped magic treasure was a boundlessly vast minor kiliacosm. This minor kiliacosm was filled with endless astral winds, lightning, fire, and all kinds of vitality. There was even an infinite amount of star essence chi. It was chaotic and violent, like the boundless chaos before the creation of the world. Hongjun sat cross-legged in the void. Beside him, there was a soaring snake that seemed to fill the entire world. There were also countless mysterious three-dimensional talismans floating around the soaring snake, as if the soaring snake was emitting billions of rays of light. Under the shroud of this kind of vision, Hongjun was like a god of creation that suppressed the past, present, and future. His entire body emitted an aura that contained infinite power and filled the world. The astral winds, lightning, and fire life forms that poured into the magic treasure were like ants crouching around Hongjun. Each of them listened to Hongjun's lecture with an extremely pious and worshipful attitude. Waves of mysterious aura spread out and filled the entire minor kiliacosm. The entire chaotic void kept surging with Hongjuan's lecture, as if there was an extremely mysterious thing being born in the void with his voice. At the beginning of the primordial world, there was an immortal called Luo Fan. He suppressed the world and was omnipotent. Hongjun used a mysterious and unpredictable voice that contained infinite comprehension to talk about all kinds of wonderful techniques. Among them, Luo Fan even heard his own name. This made him quite surprised. With a slight thought, he incorporated the various great Daos that Hongjun had talked about over the years into his mind. Luo Fan did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, just as he had expected when he told Hongjun his name was actually interpreted by Hongjun using various great Daos. In Hongjuan's interpretation, this name was like the most mysterious two words in the world. It simply contained all the power in the world. It seemed that as long as one recited these two words from time to time, one would be able to obtain incredible power. It seems that Hongjuan's change is not as great as I imagined. Luo Fan smiled slightly and slowly dispersed his perception of Hongjun. At this moment, there were as many as 30 million astral wind, thunder, and fire living beings in this tower-shaped magic treasure. With the support of so many astral wind, thunder, and fire living beings, although this magic treasure was still not as mysterious as the Void Wuji Palace. In terms of the chaotic qi produced in it, it was no less than the Void Wuji Palace. Moreover, it could distort time and space, and it could speed up the flow of time by nearly 183 times. It could be said that with the support of this magic treasure, even if Hongjuan's cultivation could not be smooth, it could still reduce countless obstacles, and he did not need to worry anymore. After dispersing his perception of Hongjun, Luo Fan focused his attention on Ao Lai and Ao Yin. Although Ao Lai and Ao Yin were innate gods that Luo Fan had captured on a whim, after spending so many years together in the Duanyuan Association, he had already developed some feelings for them. They were also closely related to him, and he naturally had to pay attention to them. Ao Lai and Ao Yin had not become talisman gods, and their cultivation realm was countless times lower than Luo Fan's, so they naturally could not stop Luo Fan's spying. With a single thought from Luo Fan, all of the conditions of the two of them were incorporated into his mind in a second. During these thousands of years, Ao Lai and Ao Yin had wandered around the primordial world, and from time to time, they would absorb all kinds of energy to temper themselves, and they would absorb all kinds of materials to strengthen themselves. Now, although the golden WIRM scissors that they had transformed into had not transformed into magic treasures, the 81 restrictions had become more complete, and they had become more flexible as they rotated. Although the power of the golden WIRM scissors might not have become more powerful, they would have to expend a lot less energy to achieve the same effect as before. While Luo Fan was focusing his attention on the two of them, Ao Lai and Ao Yin were dodging the pursuit of an innate god. This innate god was like a giant leopard with saber teeth, and he was 100 feet long. Clouds appeared under his feet, and he moved as fast as lightning. Although his spiritual sense was muddle-headed and not much better than his instincts, for some reason, he had already tempered his body to the point that it was almost indestructible, and even the golden WIRM scissors that Ao Lai and Ao Yin had transformed into couldn't harm him. It was precisely because of this that Ao Lai and Ao Yin were currently unable to resist and could only be chased by it. They quickly fled. Damn fellow. It's all your fault. If not for you, we wouldn't have been chased by him. Ao Yin complained as she unleashed her power to coordinate with Ao Lai. How can you blame me for this? You clearly said that his teeth are very hard and can definitely fuse with our bodies to strengthen our magic treasures, so I decided to provoke him. Ao Lai said in a wronged manner. Gee, right at this moment, the innate god shot out two incomparably sharp and extremely condensed blasts of energy from his teeth, and they brushed past Ao Lai and Ao Yin's bodies before slamming into the ground. In the blink of an eye, two 10 feet wide, bottomless pits were blasted into the incomparably hard ground. If it weren't for Ao Lai and Ao Yin's tacit understanding, unleashing their power in the instant that they were about to be struck and dodging the attack. 2 holes would have been blasted into the ground from top to bottom. There's no end to this, is there? Aolai had just been scolded by Aoin, and now he was suddenly given a fright, so he couldn't help but fly into a rage. Damn bitch, let's fuse and fight it out with him. All right. Aoin immediately agreed upon hearing this, and she didn't say anything else. As she spoke, the energy within their bodies flowed, and a mysterious connection was formed. This connection was extremely mysterious, and it caused their bodies to tremble violently before transforming into 2 streams of black and white energy. In an instant, they combined and condensed into a simple yet infinitely profound pair of scissors. This was the golden flood dragon scissors. At this moment, the golden flood dragon scissors was only a foot long, and compared to the innate god, it was practically negligible. This wasn't the first time that Aolai and Aoin had transformed into scissors, but it was definitely the first time that they had transformed into such a small pair of scissors. The innate god only had a muddled spiritual sense, and such a change that had never appeared before caused him to pause for a moment. After a while, he decided to follow the old method, and he opened his mouth abruptly to swallow the golden flood dragon scissors. He wanted to use his hardest teeth to crush this pair of scissors that was trying to pull his teeth out of a leopard's mouth. Still not falling for it. Aolai and Aoin fused together, and a somewhat strange voice sounded from the golden flood dragon scissors. Then, the golden flood dragon scissors flashed, and with a speed that was slightly slower than the innate god, it rushed into the innate god's mouth at a speed that was just enough to enter it. In a flash, it disappeared without a trace. As the golden flood dragon scissors entered, the innate god suddenly froze, and he roared into the sky as if he was suffering from unimaginable pain. His body flickered in midair, leaving behind countless afterimages, and he crashed into several tens of thousands of feet tall mountains, smashing them into pieces. The incomparably loud roar from his mouth was extremely tragic. After a long time, he finally stopped, and he slumped to the ground. Chapter 197. Semi-magic treasure. Pattern chain. Haha. Let's see if you still want to chase us. Now you've wilted. I'll collect some interest first. A muffled laughter sounded from the leopard innate god's stomach. Following this laughter, the innate god's abdomen trembled violently, as if there was something strange rising and falling within it. Then, as if he was about to vomit something out, a ray of black and white light suddenly rushed out of the innate god's mouth. As it passed through his mouth, it circled around his teeth a few times. Crack! A crisp sound rang out, and the 2 huge sword teeth instantly left the innate god's mouth before being enveloped by the light and disappearing without a trace. Then, the black and white light abruptly fell off the innate god's face and transformed into a man and a woman. They were none other than Aolai and Aoin. Just now, the golden jiao scissors that the 2 of them transformed into had rushed into the innate god's body. Taking advantage of the fact that the innate god's body was weaker than the outside, they twisted the golden jiao scissors and tore the innate god's heart into pieces. That was why the innate god was lying there, half dead. Damn bitch, why don't you just refine him? Aolai said, sizing up the half-dead leopard-shaped god. My heart almost leapt out of my chest when he chased us so closely just now. With that said, he raised his hand and was about to unleash his power to kill the innate god. Although he had lost his heart, the innate god's life force was extremely strong, and he only lost the ability to move, not his life. Aoin hurriedly pulled Aolai back and said, "Forget it. It's us who provoked him first. If we refine him now, it'll be a little too much. In any case, we've already obtained those 2 sword teeth, so why don't we just let him go?" As she said this, there was a hint of pity on her face. I see. That does make sense. All right then, he's lucky. We'll let him go this time. Aolai thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The innate god was muddle-headed and couldn't understand what they were talking about. Moreover, he was already half dead, so he could only glare angrily at Aoin and Aolai. Blood gushed out of the wound caused by the broken sword teeth, making him look even more wretched. Why don't we take some of his blood to refine our saber teeth? Aolai's interest was piqued. Damn bastard, let's go. I still have to find a place to refine the sword tooth into my body. If I delay any longer, the sword tooth will change its nature. Aoin urged. Hearing Aoin's urging, Aolai could only reluctantly give up. With a wave of his hand, he turned around and together with Aoin, transformed into two black and white streams of air and rushed forward. In the blink of an eye, they had already disappeared from the innate deity's sight. From Buzhou Mountain, Luo Fan was observing the scene with the help of the calculation scroll. He felt helpless. Either I don't do it, or I do it thoroughly. If I do it halfway, I'll only add to the resentment, and there will be countless loose ends in the future. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and the traces of aura left by Aolai and Aoin continued to transform and condense a huge amount of vital energy around the innate god, turning it into an invisible force that acted on the leopard-shaped innate god. With this force, the leopard-shaped innate god turned into a long rainbow and rushed toward Buzhou Mountain. The place where Aoin and Aolai were being chased was about 800 million miles away from Buzhou Mountain. It was farther than Luo Fu and the others, but not as far as Hongjun. For Luo Fan, this distance was neither short nor long, and it was quite easy to cross it. In just half a day, the leopard-shaped innate god turned into a long rainbow and rushed straight to Buzhou Mountain, landing in front of Luo Fan. Golden and silver light flashed in Luo Fan's eyes, and he had already seen everything about this innate god. His body is too strong, but his spiritual sense is too weak. If this continues, I'm afraid it will never be possible to evolve a complete spiritual sense. What a pity. After seeing it clearly, he sighed. This innate god's body was unimaginably strong, and even now, it was already comparable to Hongjun, who had obtained the earth immortal Tao fruit. This was originally an unimaginably wonderful aptitude, but it was precisely because his physical body was too strong that the development of his spiritual sense and physical body became unbalanced. This made it almost impossible for his spiritual sense to completely control his body. If this continued, the innate god's body would only become stronger and stronger, and the imbalance between his spiritual sense and body would only become greater and greater. In the end, this innate god would be transformed into a beast with an incomparably tough body, but no spiritual sense to match it. In the end, he would become a cultivator's mount or material for refining weapons. Well, since we've met, I'll give you a chance. Luo Fan's heart stirred, and he said softly. As he said this, he raised his hand, and the endless chaotic yuan qi around him floated up into the air. It kept condensing and compressing in front of him, gradually turning into a gray chain that was 100 feet long and an inch wide. The chain was engraved with countless runes that were constantly circulating. As it circulated, an extremely mysterious aura seeped out. When this chain appeared, the void within 100 feet around it seemed to be sealed, and the various yuan qi in it became much more sluggish, and the speed of its flow was more than 10 times slower. Luo Fan raised his hand gently, and the chain suddenly rushed out like a nimble dragon. With a curl, it began to swim around the 100 feet tall innate god that was in the shape of a leopard. The strength of this innate god's fleshly body was even comparable to Hongjun, who had attained the earthly immortal Tao fruit. Even though his heart was crushed by the trap set by Aolai and Aoin half a day ago, his heart had completely grown back now. At this moment, when he suddenly saw a chain about to lock him, a trace of anger flashed through his blank eyes, and his body quickly trembled. Countless afterimages were produced as he trembled, making his entire body seem rather illusory. Under this trembling, Luo Fan's chain, which was born with the ability to seal the void, actually showed signs of instability. Clearly, this leopard innate god's body was so strong that it exceeded Luo Fan's imagination. Seeing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but shake his head, and he raised his hand again. In the blink of an eye, countless illusory patterns flashed, and with a sudden rush, they were engraved on the chain again. In an instant, the void within 100 feet was suppressed once more. The leopard innate god's body, which had been shaking out countless afterimages, was frozen once more, and he was suppressed to the point that he couldn't move at all. Since the leopard innate god couldn't move, the chain naturally wouldn't hold back. Light flashed continuously, and it quickly wrapped around the innate god. In the blink of an eye, it had already circled around the innate god hundreds of times. Almost every part of the innate god's body was surrounded by light, and with a flash, it turned into countless chain-shaped tattoos that completely fused into the innate god's body. At first glance, it was as if the leopard innate god's natural fur was in the shape of such chains. After these tattoos appeared, they slowly absorbed the leopard innate god's blood essence to strengthen themselves, and they emitted a bright light, looking majestic and mysterious. Roar! The innate god struggled a few times, and found that he couldn't break free from the chain. He could only let out a roar, and with a flash, he rushed towards Luo Fan at the speed of light. Although the chain was constantly absorbing his blood essence to strengthen itself, Luo Fan was after all thinking for the innate god, so the absorption was not strong, and it only stopped the growth of the innate god's body that was constantly strengthening. The innate god's body was strong, and his body essence was not affected at all. Under such circumstances, his speed naturally wouldn't be affected, and his attack power wouldn't be reduced at all. Luo Fan smiled. Although the innate god's attack speed was fast, it was still much slower than Luo Fan's. Although he rushed to Luo Fan from dozens of feet away in a flash, Luo Fan could clearly see his every move, even the tremble of his muscles and the ripple of his fur. At this moment, his body moved slightly, and he raised his hand to press down on the innate god's head, seemingly slow but actually fast. Lightly, the innate god's body was fixed in place. As the innate god roared angrily, he smiled and said, "You will know the significance of this to you in the future." As he said this, he left a bit of will in the innate god's mind and pressed down hard. The innate god turned into a long rainbow without any resistance and went straight down Bujo Mountain. After a while, he rushed into a cave that contained the source of chaotic spirit chi halfway up the mountain. In fact, the chain didn't just block the growth of the innate god's body. It could also continue to transform and evolve in the process of absorbing the essence and blood. In the end, when the innate god's spiritual consciousness was complete and he really understood the real intention of Luo Fan, the chain would become the innate god's companion, celestial device. It was even very likely that it would transform into a semi-magic treasure, a semi-magic treasure that used the innate god's spiritual consciousness as its treasure spirit. A semi-magic treasure was a strange existence. The connection between the body of the magic treasure and the treasure spirit was quite mysterious. Although the magic treasure used the innate god's spiritual consciousness as its treasure spirit, the innate god didn't exist as the treasure spirit of the magic treasure. In other words, the innate god's spiritual consciousness could maintain its integrity, independence, and autonomy after becoming a treasure spirit. In this case, when the innate god used the chain, it would become a magic treasure, and when he didn't use it, it would become a celestial device. I wonder how you will grow in the future. Luo Fan smiled. Originally, he planned to eliminate the hatred between the innate god and Ao Lai and Ao In, but after seeing the nature of the innate god, he wanted to observe the innate god's growth.